Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was in my office until late at night. I was the only one on my floor and all the lights outside my cubicle were off. The cleaning staff had already come and gone. There was a quiet hum from the old air conditioning system. I could hear it blowing weak air through the dusty vents. My neck was stiff and my eyes were dry from staring at spreadsheets all night. I had a pile of work that wouldn't finish itself. I tried to concentrate on the computer screen, but the brightness of the monitor seemed too strong against the darkness around me. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. Across the alley stood another building. It had the same gray exterior, the same pattern of windows. It used to be part of our company's operations. It had been closed for years. The place looked empty. There were no lights. The windows were covered in dirt from years without cleaning. In the daytime, I could sometimes see old desks or chairs stacked inside. At night, it was just a dark shape. As I looked at it this time, I noticed something moving behind one of the windows. At first, I thought it could be a reflection from a distant streetlight, but then I saw a shape. It looked like a person walking past the window. The figure paused for a moment and then kept moving until it was out of sight. I sat up straight and rubbed my eyes. I waited another minute. I didn't see anything else. I felt a slight tension in my shoulders. It could have been a trick of the light. I told myself it was nothing. I went back to work. After another hour, I stretched my arms and checked my phone. It was close to 9 p.m. Outside, the street was quiet. I stood up and walked around my cubicle. I looked out the window again. This time, I caught a glimpse of something similar in a window on the floor below the one I had seen before. The same kind of shape. It looked like a person's silhouette moving behind the glass. It was dark, but I could see the movement clearly. The figure didn't stay long. It drifted out of view. My heart rate picked up. I wasn't imagining it. Something was there. I tried to think of a reason. Maybe some maintenance worker was inside. Maybe someone from security had decided to check something over there. But we had moved out years ago, and the place was sealed off. The property manager's office was empty. There shouldn't be anyone inside. I took a deep breath. I wanted to calm down. I decided to keep watching for a bit. Over the next 30 minutes, I saw the figure appear 2 more times. Each time it showed up in a different window. Sometimes it moved left to right. Other times it just stood there before disappearing. I couldn't see any details. I saw no clothing style, no facial features, just a dark human-like form. By now my hands felt a bit clammy. I wiped them on my pants. I decided I had to check. I wanted to prove to myself that I was just seeing things. I couldn't focus on my work anyway. I left my desk and made my way down the hallway. The lights were on sensors, so as I passed, they flickered on with a slight buzzing sound. The hallway smelled like old carpet and stale air. At the far end of the hall, there was a door that led to a connecting walkway between our building and the old one. That walkway had been locked for years, but I knew there was a small window there. I thought I might get a better look inside. I walked slowly, listening to my own footsteps. My shoes made soft thuds on the carpet. I approached the door. It was locked, as expected. Through its narrow window, I could see the walkway and beyond it the old building's steel door. There were no lights, and everything looked gray in the dim glow of a distant exit sign. I saw no one inside. I pressed my forehead against the glass and cupped my hands around my eyes. Nothing moved. I pulled out my keys. I didn't have the key to the old building, but I wondered if I still had the key to the walkway door. Our company never collected some old keys. I tried one, then another. One of them turned. The lock clicked, and I opened the door. The cool air of the walkway came in. It smelled musty. I stepped inside. My heart was beating faster now. I didn't know why I was doing this. I guess I wanted to settle my mind. I walked across the walkway and tried the old building's door. It didn't budge. I shined my phone's flashlight through the small window in the door. I saw a hallway inside. There was old linoleum on the floor, cracked and dirty. A few chairs were stacked against the wall. There was dust everywhere. My light reflected off old metal fixtures. No sign of movement. I stood there for at least a minute. I listened. I heard nothing, not even the hum of air conditioning. It was silent. My stomach felt uneasy. The silence felt heavy. I took a few steps back and checked the windows of the old building that faced ours. From this angle, everything looked empty. The windows were covered in grime. I couldn't see any interior lights. I couldn't see any shapes inside. I told myself I must have imagined it. After a moment, I decided to go back to my office. I locked the walkway door behind me. I walked back through the hallway to my desk. I felt a slight ache in my lower back. I sat down and tried to focus on my work again. The spreadsheets looked the same. I typed a few numbers, checked some data, but I couldn't concentrate. I looked out the window again and I saw it once more. The figure was now on a higher floor in the old building. It didn't move much this time. It just stood near the window. I couldn't see eyes or a face, but I felt like it was looking at me. I swallowed hard. The figure then walked out of sight. I felt a sweat forming on my forehead. My breathing was shallow. I stood up and walked to the window, leaning close, trying to see better. I pressed my palms against the glass. The glass felt cool. While I stared, I saw my own reflection. I looked tired. My shirt was wrinkled, but my reflection looked a bit off. I noticed that in my reflection, it looked like there was a shape standing behind me, off to the side. I turned around fast. There was no one there. I turned back to the window and checked again. In the reflection, I saw only myself. The shape behind me was gone. My heart was pounding. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing was there now. I told myself I was seeing things because I was tired. Maybe I needed some fresh air. I decided to go down to the lobby and step outside for a few minutes. I shut down my computer and grabbed my jacket. The elevator ride down was quiet. The building's lobby was mostly dark, with only a couple of overhead lights near the security desk. The security guard's booth was empty. Our building's night guard usually made rounds. I didn't see him. I pushed open the glass doors to the street. The air outside was cool. I looked up at the old building from the sidewalk. All dark windows, nothing moved. No sign of anyone inside. I walked around the block once, just to clear my head. I listened to the distant sounds of cars on a main road. A streetlight buzzed. A loose sign rattled in a mild breeze. Nothing strange happened outside. When I got back to the building's entrance, I felt a bit calmer. I decided to finish my work and go home as soon as possible. It was late anyway. Back in the elevator, I tried to relax. My floor was silent. The lights were dimmed. I moved quickly back to my cubicle. I sat down and glanced at the old building's windows. Nothing there. I started working through the last few tasks. After about 20 minutes, I felt more at ease. Maybe I had imagined the figure. Maybe it was my own reflection and my eyes were playing tricks on me. Suddenly, there was a short flicker in my overhead light. I looked up. The fluorescent tube sometimes did that. I ignored it. I turned to face the window again. The figure was back. It appeared closer now, maybe in one of the windows aligned more directly with my cubicle. It stood still this time. My chest felt tight. I tried to focus on its shape. It looked like a person wearing dark clothes, but I saw no details. Then the figure moved out of sight again. This was too strange. I decided to record a video with my phone. I positioned my phone's camera at the window and waited. About a minute passed. The figure didn't appear. I cursed under my breath and lowered the phone. I stood up and walked to the window once more, pressing myself close to the glass. I saw my reflection again. This time my reflection was clear. I could see my tired eyes, my short hair, my loose tie. Then I noticed something in the reflection. The background behind me looked different than my actual office. In the reflection, it looked like the lights behind me were dimmer, and the layout of desks was off by a few feet. I turned around, and everything was normal. I looked back at the glass, and now my reflection matched the real room. I felt a dull pain in my stomach. I stepped back and stared at the old building. I noticed one of its windows was now slightly open. I hadn't noticed that before. The windows were supposed to be sealed. I waited to see if anything would happen. Nothing did. The open window stayed as it was. I sat down again. I decided I had done enough work for the night. I shut down my computer completely, packed my bag, and got ready to leave. Before leaving, I gave the old building one last look. No figure. No strange reflection. On my way out, I stopped by the walkway door again. I don't know why I bothered, but I wanted to be sure. I unlocked it, stepped inside the walkway, and tried the old building's door one more time. Still locked. I shined my phone's flashlight through the window. Inside looked the same as before. Dusty floors, stacked chairs, darkness. I was about to turn away when I noticed something on the floor inside. There were footprints in the dust. They looked recent. They led from the far end of the hall toward the door I was looking through. I brought my face closer to the window, squinting to see better. The footprints were faint, but definitely there. They ended just before the door, as if someone had stood right there, inches from the other side of the glass. I stepped back quickly, my heart racing. I looked around the walkway. Nobody there. The door to my building was closed behind me, but I had the key. I felt warm sweat on my back. My mouth felt dry. I backed up toward my building's door, never taking my eyes off the old building's door. Nothing moved. I tried to breathe quietly. I listened for any sound. There was only silence. I opened the door to my building and locked it behind me, then hurried back down the hallway. The lights flicked on as I passed. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. While I waited, I looked back down the hallway. Everything was still. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby. On the way down, I rubbed my face and tried to steady my breathing. In the lobby, I found the security guard. He was sitting at his desk, looking at his phone. I asked him if anyone had been inside the old building next door. He shrugged and said he hadn't seen anyone. He said the old place was locked up. He seemed unconcerned. I nodded and left. I didn't want to explain everything to him. I just wanted to go home. Outside, I looked up at the old building one last time. The open window I had seen before was now closed. All the windows were dark and still. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking toward my car, parked around the corner. My legs felt weak, and my hands were shaking slightly. I kept looking over my shoulder at the old building. Nothing changed. It stood silent and empty. I got in my car and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, listening to the engine idle. I checked my phone and saw the time. It was past midnight. I drove out of the parking lot. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the reflection of the buildings behind me. Everything looked normal. I tried to push the images out of my mind. I wanted to forget what I had seen. I could still feel that tightness in my chest. The idea that someone or something had been watching me felt too real. I gripped the steering wheel and focused on getting home. I moved into this studio apartment about 2 weeks ago. The place was small and plain, just one main room with a bed in the corner, a simple wooden table against the opposite wall, a small kitchenette near the entrance, and a tiny bathroom. I had a single window facing a dark alley. The floor creaked near the door if I stepped too hard. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors shuffle around sometimes, but I couldn't see anyone through the hallway peephole except on rare occasions. The hallway lights buzzed when I came home late from work. Nothing seemed unusual in the first few days. Everything felt ordinary. Then I started waking up at exactly the same time every night. It happened around 3 in the morning, give or take a few minutes. My eyes would open and I would feel my chest tighten. I would feel goosebumps on my arms. My heart would beat faster than normal. I kept thinking I heard soft breathing from near the door, but I didn't have proof. When I tried to focus, I heard nothing but the soft hum of the mini fridge. Sometimes I could hear the neighbor's TV if it was left on, but that was muffled. Still, every time I woke up, I had this feeling that someone was standing right there at the door. The door was only about 6 feet from the foot of my bed. I never saw anything when I looked. The door was always closed, the doorknob in place. I didn't see shadows, I didn't see movement, but the feeling kept pressing on me. After a few nights of this, I started to get anxious. I remember one particular night I woke up again at that same time. My mouth felt dry. The skin on my neck felt tight. I reached over to my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it at the door. The door looked normal. Nothing weird, no marks, no noise. I got up, walked over to it in my boxers, and put my ear against it. The hallway outside was quiet. I considered opening the door, but I didn't. I just stood there, heart pounding, staring through the peephole. The hallway light was dim as usual. I saw nothing out there. After a few minutes, I went back to bed. I fell asleep again, but not quickly. The next day at work, I felt groggy. I kept thinking about that feeling at night. I began to wonder if maybe I was having some weird dream or some stress reaction, but I didn't think so. It felt too real. My body responded too strongly every time. I decided to take some steps. I went to a cheap electronics store after work and bought a small motion-activated camera. It wasn't fancy. It was the kind hunters sometimes use to see if animals pass by. It had basic night vision and could record short clips when it detected movement. I brought it home, set it up on top of the small table facing my bed and the door. I tested it by walking around the room, waving my hand, making sure it recorded. It did. The clip stored on a small memory card that I could play back on my laptop. I felt a bit silly, but I was determined to see if something was actually moving around in my apartment at night. That evening, I turned out the lights as usual at around midnight. I lay in bed staring at the door for a while. I kept the small camera's status light turned off, so no one would know it was recording. The studio was dark, and I could just make out the shape of the door by the faint glow coming from the window. Outside, a distant street lamp gave the room a soft, weak light. I drifted off to sleep eventually, my thoughts scattered. I woke up again at around 3 in the morning, the same weird feeling crawling up my spine. I shot up in bed, breathing fast. I didn't know why I felt so panicked, but I did. I couldn't see anything unusual in that darkness. My heart was thumping. My forehead was damp. I reached for my phone and checked the time. It was 3:07 a.m. My throat felt tight. I sat there and listened. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. After a few minutes, I managed to lie back down. I didn't want to look at the camera yet. I waited until morning. When I got up after sunrise, I almost forgot about the camera. The room looked completely normal in daylight. But then I remembered what happened. I took the memory card out of the camera, inserted it into my laptop, and scrolled through the recorded clips. The camera had recorded several short videos. Most of them were me moving around before sleep, or me shifting in bed. But one clip, timed around 3:05 a.m., caught my attention. The camera had turned on and recorded for about 10 seconds. In that clip, I saw my bed in grainy night vision, me lying asleep. Then suddenly I shifted, and right at that moment, there was a faint shape near the door. It wasn't clear. It looked like a dark smudge or a vague outline. It moved slightly from left to right and then out of frame. It was too blurry to identify. It could have been a shadow from the hallway. But the door was closed, and I didn't see how a shadow from outside would appear inside like that. I sat there staring at that clip over and over. My heart started racing again. I felt a tightness in my chest. This wasn't my imagination. Something triggered the camera. That meant something moved inside the room. Something was there. I checked the front door lock. It was locked. I checked the window, which was about 6 feet off the ground outside. No fire escape, no balcony, and it was locked too. The bathroom door was closed, and no one was inside. I opened the closet. Nothing. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the hum of the fridge. Everything was quiet. I felt nauseous. I decided I should do more. I went out and bought another small camera that afternoon. I placed one camera near the table facing the bed and door as before. I placed the second camera near the kitchenette, facing toward the door and part of the main room from another angle. I wanted more angles to see what the hell was going on. I also replaced the batteries in the first camera. I tested both. They worked fine. I tried to keep calm that evening. I watched a dumb TV show on my laptop, tried to relax. I didn't drink alcohol. I wanted to have a clear head. I turned off the lights at midnight again and lay in bed staring at that door. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, the quiet hiss of distant traffic through the window. I fell asleep eventually. Again, I woke up around the same time. I opened my eyes and felt a rush of panic. My heart was pounding in my ears. I could feel sweat collecting at the base of my neck. The room was silent, but I felt a presence. I looked toward the door. There was no obvious shape this time. I didn't see movement. I just felt it. I sat up, reached for my phone, shone the light. Nothing. The door and the walls were bare. The table was where it should be. The kitchenette looked normal. I saw the tiny camera lights off. Everything seemed still. After a while, I went back to sleep, but it took a long time. In the morning, I checked the footage. Again, there was a short clip around that same time. Both cameras had recorded something. On the first camera's footage, I could see myself sleeping. Then I started to stir. Right before I moved, there was this blur in front of the door, like a faint vertical shape that passed quickly. On the second camera's footage, I could also see a dark, faint shape near the door, but from that angle, it looked smaller. It was a quick flicker, just enough to trigger recording. I paused the video and tried to look frame by frame. It was just a vague shadow. I couldn't identify anything like clothing or a face. I checked the door again. The lock wasn't tampered with. The chain was in place. The deadbolt was engaged. I examined the door frame. I pressed against it. Solid. No hidden panels. Nothing loose. I checked the walls around the door. Everything was solid. I tried to push on the window, see if maybe someone could open it from outside, but it didn't budge. The outside ledge was too narrow for anyone to stand on. I had no explanation. For the rest of that day, I felt on edge. I tried calling the landlord, but he didn't answer. I didn't want to sound crazy. I just said I had a small issue and wanted to talk. I left a voicemail. I tried talking to a neighbor I ran into in the hallway. He was a guy around my age. I asked him if he'd heard any strange noises at night. He said no. He said he worked late sometimes and hadn't noticed anything unusual. I asked if anyone else had complained about break-ins. He said not that he knew of. I could tell he thought I was acting weird, so I dropped the subject. That night, I didn't know what else to do. I locked the door carefully, closed the window, turned off the lights, and lay in bed. I felt dread building up inside me. I was tired, but also too wound up. I must have drifted off at some point because, right on cue, I woke again in the early morning hours. This time, my skin felt cold and clammy. I sat up immediately, flicked on my phone's light, and aimed it at the door. I jumped out of bed and walked slowly toward it. My legs felt shaky. I reached the door and pressed my ear against it. I heard nothing. I tried the knob, still locked. I put my eye to the peephole. The hallway was empty. I looked back at my bed. I didn't see any movement in the room. I flicked the light switch on the wall. The overhead bulb lit up. The room looked normal. I turned the light off again and went back to bed. I didn't sleep well. In the morning, I checked the footage again. Both cameras had recorded something. This time, the shape looked a bit different. It seemed closer to the door, a bit larger. It hovered there for a second and then disappeared. I couldn't tell what it was. It had no clear outline. It was like a patch of darkness shifting around. It made no sound. It left no trace. Watching the footage made my stomach tighten. My hands felt sweaty. I slammed my laptop shut and paced around the room. I decided to stay awake the next night. Maybe if I was awake at 3 in the morning, I'd see it. I made coffee and sipped it while browsing random websites to kill time. I kept the lights off. By 2:30, I felt jumpy. By 3, I was wide awake, staring at the door, phone in hand. A few minutes passed, and I felt that same tension crawl up my back. My shoulders felt stiff. The hair on my arms stood up. I aimed my phone's camera at the door, recording video. I didn't see anything at first. But then, out of the corner of my eye, something seemed to shift near the lower right side of the door frame. I aimed the light there. Nothing. The feeling got stronger. I breathed through my mouth, trying not to shake. I recorded for a full minute, but caught nothing. Finally, I gave up and tried to sleep. The next morning, I reviewed my phone video. Nothing. The cameras, though, picked up the shape again. This time, it lingered a bit longer. Maybe 2 seconds. I saw it hover near the door as I lay awake in bed. It was there even though I didn't see it with my eyes. This freaked me out. I couldn't figure out what was happening. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? There was no sign of a break-in, and I had no clear evidence of a person. It was just a weird shadow. I couldn't call a friend and tell them. They'd think I was losing my mind. I tried the landlord again, but he didn't call back. I checked online for any news about strange break-ins in the area. I found nothing. I started feeling trapped in that studio. Every night it was the same routine. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and tried to sleep. And every night, around the same time, I'd wake up terrified and see nothing while the cameras recorded this faint, shapeless figure. I bought a flashlight and kept it next to the bed. I aimed it at the door when I woke up, but I never caught anything. The cameras were the only ones that detected it. I tried sleeping with the overhead light on. That night, I still woke up, felt uneasy, and the cameras still recorded something. The shape looked even more distorted under the light, but still there, flickering in the corner. My body started reacting to these nights. I had headaches during the day. My muscles felt stiff. I would snap at people at work. I had trouble focusing. I wanted to solve this. One night I pushed my table close to the door before going to sleep, so if anyone tried to come in, they'd have to move the table. In the morning, the table was still in place. No one had touched it, but the cameras caught the shape again, near the top of the door this time, as if it hovered above it. Another night I set up an old phone as a third camera on the windowsill, facing the door from another angle. Same thing. Each camera recorded the shape, slightly different each time, never clear, always fading in and out. I never heard it speak. I never found footprints. I never felt a breeze or smelled anything. It was always silent and just barely visible. Yet I felt it every single time, like a cold needle pressed into the back of my neck. After a while, I stopped trying to catch it in the act. I just wanted to get some sleep, but that never happened. Every night around 3 in the morning, I would wake up. My heart would race, I would look at the door, I would feel someone there but see nothing. The cameras would record a small glimpse of that thing, whatever it was, and that would be it. I tried ignoring it, but it didn't stop. I tried leaving the TV on for background noise. Didn't help. I tried moving the bed to a different corner of the studio. Still the same feeling. I tried sleeping on the floor. Nothing changed. The cameras kept catching that faint shadow. After about a week of this, I accepted that I had no explanation. It was happening, and I couldn't make it stop. Now, I still live here. The shape still appears almost every night. I still wake up at the same time. I still feel my heart pound when I look at the door. I still play back the footage in the morning, and there it is, moving slightly, fading in and out, leaving me with no answers. I keep the door locked, I keep checking the window, but I find nothing that would explain it. I've stopped calling the landlord. I stopped telling anyone. It's just me, living with whatever this thing is, and I have no idea what it wants. I moved into the house on a Saturday morning. I had boxes piled up in the front hall and old furniture wrapped in plastic scattered across the living room. The place smelled stale, like it had been shut for a long time. The windows were dusty, and there were uneven floorboards in some rooms. There were a few spiders in the corners. The paint on the walls was chipped, and the wiring seemed old. The attic was above my bedroom. I knew this from the layout the realtor gave me. I had not gone up there yet. I planned on checking it out after I settled in. My first few nights there were quiet enough. I noticed that the house creaked a bit when the wind blew outside. The walls were thin, and I could hear the pipes humming when I turned on the bathroom sink. Late at night, I sometimes heard small noises coming from above. At first, I thought it could be squirrels or maybe the wood expanding. The noises were not loud, just light tapping or a soft knocking sound. Sometimes I would stand in the hallway, looking up at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the exact spot. But I could never be sure where it came from. It always seemed to be somewhere just above my bedroom. One night, around midnight, I lay in bed with the light off, thinking about work and the furniture I still needed to arrange. The tapping started again. It was a slow, rhythmic sound, like someone lightly tapping a fingernail against a hollow door. I turned on my bedside lamp and stared at the ceiling. The sound paused. I waited, listening closely. After a few seconds, it came again. A series of 3 taps, then silence, then 3 taps again. I got up, walked out into the hallway, and looked up at the hatch that led into the attic. The hatch was in the small corridor that connected my bedroom to the spare room. I had a folding ladder leaning against the wall, the one I used when I painted the kitchen ceiling. I decided I should finally look inside the attic. I was nervous. I felt my chest tighten a bit, and I noticed my palms were sweating as I grabbed the ladder. I positioned it under the attic hatch. I climbed up and pushed the hatch door open. A musty smell came down. I shone my flashlight inside. It was dark, dusty, and cramped. I saw wooden beams, old boxes, and what looked like a broken chair. There was also a large mirror leaning in a corner. The glass on the mirror looked cloudy. Its frame had peeling paint. I stuck my head up and looked around, but I saw no movement. I heard nothing. I stayed quiet for a minute, shining the flashlight slowly over everything. Then I climbed back down and closed the hatch. I did not see anyone or anything unusual. I went back to bed and fell asleep after a while. The next night, I heard the tapping again. This time, it sounded a bit louder. It happened around the same hour. I got up faster this time. I opened the hatch and climbed into the attic. I aimed my flashlight around. Nothing moved. I walked carefully, ducking under beams. My boots kicked up dust from the floorboards. I felt cobwebs brushing against my arm. I saw the same mirror in the corner. The surface of the mirror had a film of dust, but I could still see a bit of my reflection when I moved close. I approached it and wiped the surface with my sleeve. As I did that, I thought I saw something behind me in the reflection, like the shape of a person. I spun around quickly, shining the flashlight into the darkness. There was no one. I looked back into the mirror, but all I saw was myself and the dark shapes of the attic's beams. I backed away, keeping the light on that spot. Nothing moved. I went back down again, feeling uneasy. My heart was beating faster than normal, and I had a tight feeling in my stomach. I slept badly that night. In the morning, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I had been tired, and the attic was dark. Maybe the reflection was just my own shadow. The tapping could be old pipes or wood. There were a lot of possible explanations. Over the next few days, I arranged more of my belongings. I fixed some light fixtures and swept the floors. The house was quiet during the day. I never heard anything unusual before sunset. But at night, usually around midnight, the tapping returned. It seemed to come from the same area above my bedroom. Sometimes it was 3 taps, sometimes 4 or 5. When I climbed up to check, I found no animals, no loose pipes, nothing that could explain the sound. I started to feel anxious as bedtime approached. On the 5th night in the house, I decided I would stay in the attic for a while, waiting. I went up around 11:30 p.m. with a flashlight, a small chair, and my cell phone. I set the chair facing the mirror. The mirror was in the far right corner, leaning against a sloping part of the roof. I sat about 6 feet away from it. The attic was silent except for a slight humming sound from the distant traffic outside. I waited, breathing slowly. My back felt stiff, and the dust in the air made me want to sneeze. I tried to stay calm and alert. Around midnight, I heard a soft tap. It came from somewhere behind me. I turned, shining the flashlight, but I saw only boxes and a bundle of old cables. I heard another tap, this time in front of me. I looked at the mirror. I felt a sudden chill on my arms. I got up and approached the mirror, leaning forward to inspect it. As I shone the light on it, I saw a reflection that did not match what was behind me. Behind me, there should have been an old box and a wooden beam. In the reflection, I saw a person's shoulder and part of a head. The shape looked solid. I could see what looked like dark fabric. I spun around. There was nothing there, just empty space. I felt panic rising. My breathing got faster and I stood very still, listening. I took a few steps backward, away from the mirror. I tried to calm down. I checked my phone for a signal. I had a weak signal, but I could call someone if I needed to. I did not know who to call. The police would not care about some strange reflection in an old mirror. I was not sure what I had seen. It could have been a trick of the light. I decided to cover the mirror. I found an old sheet in one of the boxes. It smelled like mold. I shook it out and draped it over the mirror's frame. Then I went back downstairs, closed the hatch, and locked my bedroom door. I did not sleep well. I felt restless, and my throat was dry. In the morning, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I might have been half asleep. That night, I heard the tapping again. I tried to ignore it. I stayed in bed holding my pillow. The tapping got louder, then stopped. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a small knife, and held it while I listened. There was no more tapping. I waited a few minutes, then put the knife down. I felt ridiculous holding a knife. I was not in any immediate danger. I just felt unsettled. The next evening, I decided to face it again. I went up to the attic earlier, around 10 p.m. I wanted to see if anything had changed. I climbed up quietly. When I shone the flashlight around, I saw that the sheet I had placed over the mirror had slipped off on one side. It was still covering most of the mirror, but one corner of it was pulled back. I had draped it securely, so it was strange that it had slipped. The attic windows were sealed, and I had not felt any strong drafts. I approached the mirror and fixed the sheet. I took my time, making sure it would not slip. I then walked around the attic, checking for any openings, loose boards, or animal droppings that might explain the noises. I found nothing unusual. It was just old boxes, some old furniture parts, and dust. I left the attic and went back to my bedroom. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. At midnight, the tapping started again. This time I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed up. I wanted to catch whatever was causing this. I opened the hatch. As soon as I stuck my head inside, I heard a rustling sound near the mirror. I pulled myself up fast and aimed the light. The sheet was halfway off the mirror again. I froze. I had just fixed it. I approached the mirror slowly. My heart was pounding. I could feel sweat on my forehead. I reached for the sheet. Suddenly, in the reflection, I saw a face. It had eyes and a mouth. The eyes looked focused on me. I saw short hair and a neutral expression. I felt my legs tremble. I turned around quickly. Nothing was there. I turned back to the mirror. Now I only saw my own face in the attic behind me. I took a step back and almost tripped over a box. I was breathing through my mouth, trying to stay calm. I decided to speak out loud. I said, "Who is there?" My voice sounded shaky. I waited, but I heard nothing. I walked backward until I reached the hatch. Then I climbed down, closed it, and pushed a heavy box on top of it. I wanted to block it off. I could not think of a better solution at that moment. I sat in my bedroom chair for about an hour, just staring at the ceiling. I did not want to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I finally lay down. I kept the lamp on. I dozed off after a long time. For the next few days, I avoided the attic. The noises above continued every night. I tried to watch TV, use my laptop, and ignore it. I started considering leaving the house, at least for a while, but I had nowhere else to stay. I had just moved, and my budget was tight. I also felt I needed to understand what was happening. Maybe there was a logical explanation. On the following Saturday, I decided to record what was happening. I set up my phone's camera in the attic during the afternoon and left it there facing the mirror. I left the sheet off this time so I could capture anything unusual. At midnight, I heard the tapping again. I stayed downstairs, pretending to ignore it. In the morning, I climbed up, grabbed my phone, and checked the recording. The video was long and showed only darkness at first. I advanced through it. At around midnight in the video's timeline, I saw the sheet start moving on its own. It slipped down slowly. After a few minutes, it stopped. Then the phone's image showed a faint shape moving across the frame, just a slight shift of shadows. It was hard to identify. When I paused the video, I saw something that looked like a shoulder passing in front of the camera. It was hard to make out details. There was no sound other than my own steps when I left earlier. I felt a chill. Something was definitely happening. I went back up later that day with a screwdriver and some nails. I decided to remove the mirror, or at least move it to another part of the house. I gripped the side of the mirror and tried lifting it. It was heavier than I expected. I managed to tilt it forward. Behind it, I saw a small gap in the wall. The gap looked like a hidden compartment. I shined my flashlight inside. There was a folded blanket and an old jacket in there. The jacket looked dusty and worn. I pulled it out carefully. It smelled old and damp. I placed it on the floor. I reached back inside but found nothing else. I lifted the mirror again, intending to carry it out. But as I pulled, I felt sudden resistance. It was as if someone was pulling it back from the other side. I let go. The mirror fell back against the wall. I tried again, but it refused to budge. I was angry and confused. I pressed my shoulder against it and pushed. It did not move. I stepped back, breathing heavily. My arms were sore from the effort. I shined the flashlight on the mirror's surface again. My reflection looked pale and tense. I looked closely, checking every detail. I could see my sweat, the dust on my shirt, the trembling in my fingers. Then for a split second, I noticed another face over my shoulder. I turned around instantly, but I was alone. I stood there facing the mirror, trying not to panic. I spoke again, louder this time. "I don't know who you are or what you want," I said. My voice echoed slightly in the attic. There was no response. I grabbed the old blanket and jacket and carried them down. I thought maybe these belonged to someone who once lived here. I left them in a corner of the hallway. I planned to throw them out later. That night, I locked my bedroom door. The tapping came again. It sounded louder. I put on headphones and tried to ignore it. After a while, it stopped. In the morning, I checked the attic again. The mirror was still there, leaning against the wall. I did not see any faces this time. I did not hear any noises. I placed a heavy dresser under the attic hatch just in case. I did not want to be surprised again. Over the next week, I still heard tapping at night, but sometimes it was softer, sometimes it was louder. I never saw the figure in the mirror as clearly as before. Sometimes I noticed slight movements on its surface, but when I looked directly, I only saw myself. I tried spending less time thinking about it. I focused on cleaning the rest of the house. I fixed a broken window latch. I replaced some light bulbs. I tried to move forward with my life inside this place. I still do not know who that figure was. I have not tried to break the mirror or do anything drastic, but I have considered it. For now, I am just living with it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear a few taps. I think about that face I saw. I get up, drink some water, and wait until I feel calm. So far, nothing has harmed me. It is just unsettling. The attic remains as it is, and the mirror is still up there, covered with a sheet that does not always stay in place. I still see no reason for what is happening. It might continue as long as I live here. I never found a neat explanation. I never found any records or papers that would clarify it. I have stopped trying to force answers. I keep a flashlight and a hammer in my bedroom drawer, just in case I need them. The tapping still comes at night. Sometimes I wake up sweating, remembering that face behind me. Sometimes I think I should leave this house, but for now I stay. The old attic is above me with that mirror and whatever else is there. I go on with my daily life and try not to think about it too much. I started my walk a little after sunrise. I remember the sky being clear and the air feeling cold on my face. I took the same trail I always took, a narrow dirt path that ran through a patch of dense forest behind the old campground. Normally, I never ran into other people that early. I like that. I like the quiet. That day, I noticed something off as soon as I passed the row of tall pines on the left. I heard low voices. At first, I thought it might have been the wind or maybe some hikers far ahead. I slowed down and listened. The sounds were coming from the trees on both sides, but I did not see anyone. The whispers were soft, but they did not fade when I stopped walking. When I started walking again, they seemed to get louder. I tried to ignore it. I took a deep breath and looked back at the empty trail. There was no one behind me. I could see clear footprints, my own from when I first came in, and a few scattered pine needles on the ground. Nothing else, no movement, just my footprints in the damp soil. Yet the whispering did not stop. The voices sounded very low, almost like a soft breath right behind my ears. They were words I could not understand. I could not pick out a language. They were more like quiet breaths shaped into strange sounds. I walked forward. The trail was straight for about 30 feet, then it curved sharply to the left. As I approached the bend, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to move with me, staying just out of sight. I stopped again and turned around slowly. I stood still, listening, scanning the trees. I saw the morning light between the trunks, patches of moss, damp leaves, and the rough bark. I saw no movement, except for a squirrel darting up a tree far off to the right. I heard my own breathing, uneven and shallow. I noticed that my hands felt cold and my fingertips were a little numb. The hairs on my arms stood up. I tried to speak. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded strange in the quiet. The whispers paused for a second, but then they started again. I could not pinpoint the source. It felt like they surrounded me. I raised my voice. "Who's there?" Nothing answered clearly, just more quiet sounds that resembled whispers. They did not stop. They only faded a little, then came back stronger as I took another step. I felt a knot in my stomach. I was not sure what to do. This was a public area. There could have been people messing around. Maybe someone was trying to scare hikers. That idea crossed my mind, so I tried to catch them. I moved off the path, stepping over some roots and pushing through a thin set of bushes. I tried to move quietly, looking for anyone crouching behind the trees. I found no one. I saw a few old branches on the ground, some small holes where animals might have dug. I saw wet leaves and a large spider web stretched between two low branches. But no people, no sign of a person hiding. When I stepped back onto the trail, I listened again. The whispers were still there. They had not changed in tone. They were steady, low, and constant. My chest felt tight. I tried to calm myself. I told myself to keep walking and see if it eventually stopped. I walked another few yards. The forest looked normal. The path was a bit muddy from rain the night before. My boots sank slightly as I stepped. I kept my eyes straight ahead. The sunlight filtered in, but the forest still felt dim under all those leaves. I moved at a steady pace, but every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder. No one was there. Just an empty trail behind me, the way I had come. The whispers seemed to react to my movements. When I walked faster, they got louder. When I slowed down, they softened. They never went completely silent. They never sounded friendly or angry. They just sounded neutral, but persistent. That bothered me. I could not figure out what they wanted. I tried talking again. I said, "I know someone is out there." My voice shook a bit. "Can you just stop? This is not funny." I waited, but the whispering continued. No response, no laughter, no running footsteps. Nothing. My breathing got heavier. I felt a light sweat forming at the back of my neck. I ran one hand through my hair and noticed my hand was shaking. The trail ahead looked the same, just more trees, more damp ground. I knew there was a small clearing about half a mile ahead, where the trail opened up near a broken fence and some old signs. I decided to head there. I thought maybe if I got into a more open space, I could see who was doing this. I wanted to solve this. I wanted it to end. As I walked, I focused on the details around me, trying to spot something unusual. I saw leaves moving in a gentle breeze. I heard a crow calling somewhere far off. The ground smelled like wet soil and old wood. I heard small twigs snapping under my boots. The whispers did not match any animal sound I knew. They did not match the wind through the branches. They were too deliberate. They had a pattern, a human rhythm without clear words, but definitely human-like in tone. I pushed forward. My shoulders felt tense and my lower back started to ache slightly from the way I was walking stiffly. I tried to relax, but every time I eased up, the whispers reminded me that I was not alone. I checked my phone, hoping to see if I had signal. I pulled it from my jacket pocket and looked at the screen. No bars, just the time glowing back at me. It was still early, not even 7 a.m. I cursed under my breath and put the phone away. I kept moving. My heartbeat felt faster than normal and my mouth felt dry. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing quiet. I did not want whoever was out there to sense my fear. I tried to walk normally, not too fast, not too slow. I felt the weight of each step in my legs. As I approached the clearing, I could see more light ahead. The trees thinned out a bit. The whispers did not fade. If anything, they grew clearer in that thinner patch of trees. I could hear the slight intake of breath, a gentle hiss at the end of each whisper. It sounded like more than one voice, maybe 2 or 3, all blending together, whispering just out of sight. I reached the clearing. It was just a small opening in the forest where the trail split in 2 directions. On the right, a path led up a slight hill. On the left, a broken wooden fence separated the trail from a thick patch of brush. I stood there and turned slowly in a full circle. I took my time looking at every trunk, every shadow. I saw nothing, just silence except for those whispers. They were still there, following me like an echo without a source. I stepped toward the fence. It was about waist high, with a few boards missing. Beyond it, I saw more forest floor, ferns, and a fallen log covered in moss. I listened. The whispers sounded very close, but I still could not see anyone. I leaned forward, peering between the tree trunks. My heart was pounding, and I could feel my hands sweating. I wiped my palms on my pants and tried to steady my breathing. I decided to call out again, louder this time. "I know you're out there. Stop messing around. Show yourself." My voice sounded angry and a bit shaky. The whispers paused for a moment. I held my breath, expecting something to happen. But after a few seconds, the whispers started again, just as low and persistent as before. I felt my stomach tighten. I realized I was clenching my jaw. I needed to do something. Standing there would not help. I stepped back onto the main trail and started walking again. I chose the path that led uphill. It was steeper and less traveled, but I thought maybe I could get a better vantage point from higher ground. The dirt was loose under my boots, and I had to be careful with my steps. I grabbed a tree trunk to steady myself as I climbed. I felt the rough bark under my fingers and a bit of moisture from the dew. Halfway up the slope, the whispers grew louder again. They stayed behind me, always behind me. Every time I turned, I saw nothing, just emptiness. The forest looked the same in every direction. I felt a growing sense of frustration mixing with the fear. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. I wanted to know why they were following me and whispering instead of talking like a normal person. As I climbed higher, I noticed that the air felt thinner. My breathing got heavier and my legs felt a little sore. I forced myself onward. The trail narrowed, and I had to watch my step around some exposed roots. I kept scanning the trees. The bark was dark with moisture and the ground was covered with brownish needles. Every time I turned around, I looked carefully at the pattern of trunks and branches. I tried to memorize them in case something moved. Nothing moved. Nothing made any sound except the whispers and my own breathing. I did not even hear many birds anymore. Just an occasional distant call, but mostly nothing. Just these strange, steady, quiet voices always trailing behind me. At the top of the slope, the trail leveled out. I could see a small patch of sky between the treetops. The morning light was brighter now. I wiped sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand. I stood still and waited, breathing slowly. The whispers were still there. They sounded like they were coming from no specific direction now, as if the entire forest around me carried that sound. It was unsettling. I realized I was not getting anywhere by going deeper. Maybe I should turn around and head back. The idea of going back down that trail made me uneasy, but staying out here without a plan did not seem smart. I decided to head back to the main area near the campground and see if I could find other people. Maybe if I got near a busier section of the forest, these whispers would stop. I turned around and started walking back down. The slope was tricky. I leaned back a little, careful not to slip. The mud stuck to my boots. My footsteps sounded loud compared to the whispers. I tried to ignore the sounds and focus on getting down safely. Halfway down, I paused to catch my breath. The whispers never left. They hung in the air like a constant reminder that I was being watched. I continued until I reached the clearing again. I looked around, hoping to see another hiker, a jogger, anyone. It was still empty. The trail leading out of the forest was a good 20 minutes walk. I started walking that way. I decided to push through and get out of this place. I kept my eyes on the path ahead. The ground was still damp and I felt a slight chill despite my body feeling warm from the exertion. The whispers seemed to follow. As I moved forward, they remained behind me, always at the same distance. I tried to trick them. I suddenly spun around, expecting to catch someone behind a tree. I saw only trunks and leaves. Nothing else. My heart sank a bit. I felt a lump in my throat. This was not normal. Even if someone was pranking me, they would have to be incredibly good at hiding and moving silently. And how did they keep making that whispering sound without me seeing their lips move or their shadow shift? I shook my head and kept going. I stepped over some exposed roots and tried to pick up my pace. My boots squelched in a small puddle. Water splashed onto my pant leg. I barely noticed. I just kept moving, hoping the exit was near. The forest floor and the dense trees made it hard to get a sense of distance, but I had walked this path many times before. I knew that eventually it would open up near a gravel road. Once I reached that gravel road, I would be close to the parking area and the entrance. I would feel safer there. As I pressed on, the whispers continued. They never changed in tone or volume, just matched my speed. When I moved quickly, they stayed loud. When I slowed, they quieted slightly. They seemed linked to my motion. I tried stopping completely again. I held my breath and listened. The whispers did not stop. They just hovered at that same level, waiting. I started to feel a bit dizzy. My stomach felt queasy. I could feel sweat on my forehead and between my shoulder blades. My hands were shaking. I did not want to panic, but I felt close to it. My throat felt dry and I wanted water, but I did not want to stop. I just wanted to leave. I saw a familiar fallen tree that I recognized from previous hikes. I knew I was close to the edge of the forest. Just a few more minutes and I would reach the gravel road. I pushed forward, ignoring the pain in my legs and the tightness in my chest. I clutched the straps of my backpack, holding on to something solid and real. Finally, I saw the tree line thinning out. I saw the grayish color of gravel through the leaves. I almost laughed with relief. I walked faster, ignoring the whispers. They stayed behind me, constant, but I focused on the way out. I stepped onto the gravel and felt small rocks crunch under my boots. I looked around. The open space felt good. The road was empty, but at least I had room to move. I turned around and looked back into the forest. The trees stood quietly. The whispers were still there, faint, but now they sounded more distant. I took a few steps back toward the forest line and listened. The whispers got louder again. I stepped back onto the gravel and they softened. I realized they seemed tied to the forest. If I stayed on the gravel, they were weaker. I took a deep breath and wiped my face with my sleeve. I looked up and down the gravel road. There was no one around, but I felt safer. I could still hear the whispers, but now they seemed weaker, as if blocked by the open space. I stood there for a few minutes, catching my breath and calming myself. My heart rate slowed down. My muscles felt tired and heavy. I could still hear a faint whispering if I strained my ears, but it no longer felt like it was following me. It just sounded like a distant, strange noise coming from deep in the forest. I decided to leave. I turned and started walking down the gravel road toward the parking area. Every few steps I glanced back, half expecting something or someone to appear at the edge of the trees. No one did. The morning light felt warmer out there. I could smell something fresher in the air. Maybe just the open breeze instead of damp forest floor. My shirt clung to my back and my legs felt shaky, but I kept going. I just wanted to reach my car and get away. As I walked, the whispers faded more and more. After a few minutes, I could no longer hear them at all. All I heard was the crunch of gravel in my own footsteps. I reached the parking area. My car was there, the only one. I opened the door and got inside. I locked the doors and sat still for a moment, breathing quietly, feeling the steering wheel under my hands. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw nothing unusual, just empty road and trees beyond. I started the engine and pulled away. My hands were steady now, and my breathing was normal. My throat still felt dry, and my clothes still felt damp with sweat, but I was safe. The whispers stayed behind in that forest. I did not know what they were or why they followed me, but I did not care anymore. I was done. I left that place and drove home in silence. I did not plan to return anytime soon. I moved into the house on a quiet street a few months ago. It was a shared place with 3 other tenants. The landlord lived upstairs in a separate unit. The rent was reasonable, and the location was okay. The house had a long hallway inside and a few doors on the ground floor. One of those doors led to the basement. From the first day I arrived, that basement door stood out. It had a large padlock on the outside and thick hinges. The paint around it looked a bit rough, as if it had been repainted several times over the years. The landlord told me that the basement was off limits. He said he stored old equipment down there, things he did not want us messing with. I did not think about it much at first. I had my own room on the ground floor facing the backyard. I shared the kitchen and living room with the other guys. We were not friends, but we got along fine. I kept my stuff tidy and tried not to bother anyone. I had a 9-to-5 job, so I was not home very often during the day. At night, I would come back, eat something, and then hang out in my room. Sometimes I watched TV in the living room, and on a few occasions, I noticed that basement door. It was always locked. The padlock looked old but solid. A few weeks after I moved in, I started noticing something strange about that door. There were scratch marks on the lower part, on the inside. I saw them one day when I came home early and the door to the basement was slightly ajar. I do not know why it was open. Maybe the landlord had gone down there for some reason and forgot to lock it completely. I only noticed because I walked down the hallway and saw a thin sliver of darkness through the crack. Curious, I approached. I pushed it a bit, and the door did not budge much because the padlock was still in place on the outside hinge, but loose. I looked through the gap and saw scratch marks on the wood. They were small, shallow, but there were many of them, one over the other, forming this uneven pattern that looked like something had been trying to claw its way out. I got a chill. I did not know what to make of it. My first thought was that there might be an animal trapped down there. That night, I waited until the landlord was outside smoking. and I casually mentioned that I had seen the basement door slightly open. I said I noticed some damage inside. He just smiled and said, "It's just some structural adjustments I had to make. The wood is old. It scrapes when I try to fix the frame." He shrugged and waved it off. I looked at him carefully, and he avoided eye contact for a moment. I had a weird feeling, but I did not push it. He seemed calm enough, and I did not want to start any conflict. Over the next week, I watched that door every time I left for work and every time I came back. It stayed locked, and I never saw it open again. But after a few days, I noticed more scratches, deeper this time. I saw them after the landlord called a handyman to reinforce the door. I heard them working out there one afternoon. There was drilling, hammering, and some scraping sounds. When I came home, the door looked different. The hinges had been replaced, and the frame looked sturdier. The padlock had been switched out for a new one. But when I peeked at the inside edge again, I saw fresh scratch marks, as if something had scratched the new wood. I felt my chest tighten. I had no reason to be scared, but I was. My palms felt sweaty, and I had trouble sleeping that night. I tried to push the thought out of my head. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the handyman had used a tool that slipped and scratched the wood. That made some sense, but I was not fully convinced. In the following days, I started paying attention to sounds at night. Around midnight, when everything was quiet, I sometimes heard a faint scraping sound. It came from that direction. It was not loud, and I could not always be sure. The house had old pipes and floorboards. It might have been something else. Still, I could not relax. After a few more nights, I decided to investigate a bit. I waited until everyone was out. It was a Saturday afternoon. The other tenants were at their jobs or out doing something. The landlord was gone too. I tried to open the door. It was locked tight. I got down on my knees and ran my fingertips over the edge of the door, feeling for the scratches. I could feel the grooves in the wood. They were uneven and rough. They did not feel like tool marks. They felt random and desperate. There was also a faint smell coming from the crack under the door, a smell of damp and stale air. It reminded me of a closed-up basement with no ventilation. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. I tried shaking it, but it was solid. When the landlord returned that evening, I tried a different approach. I told him I was concerned about the basement. I said I heard noises and saw that the door had scratches. I said I wanted to make sure no animal was trapped down there. He looked annoyed. He said there were no animals. He said he kept some old wooden beams down there that he had tried to fit into the door frame at some point, and that's why it looked scraped up. He insisted it was not a big deal. He said he had reinforced the door because it was old, and he did not want it to warp. He kept repeating that it was nothing to worry about. I did not believe him. He seemed too tense. After that conversation, he started giving me these looks whenever I walked by. He did not smile as much as before. He looked at me from the corner of his eye. I stopped bringing it up. That night, I woke up to a sound in the hallway. It was a quiet scraping sound, then a kind of soft thumping. I got up quietly and opened my bedroom door a crack. The hallway was dark. I stood there, holding my breath. The sound stopped. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I heard a faint creak. It sounded like the basement door shifting on its hinges. I flicked on my room's light, stepped into the hallway, and looked around. The basement door was locked as usual. Everything looked normal. The other tenants' doors were shut. I felt foolish and went back to bed, but I could not sleep well. Over the following week, similar things happened several times. I heard scratching, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter. Once I thought I heard a muffled sound like a low growl, but I was not sure. It could have been my imagination. Still, the marks on the door kept appearing. I noticed some on the inside of the frame. I could see fresh wood shavings on the floor a couple of times, tiny bits that were easy to miss. The landlord claimed he had not touched the door again. The handyman never came back. I started feeling uneasy in the house. I spent more time out with friends after work, just so I would not have to sit in that hallway and think about the door. When I came home late, I would hurry to my room. I avoided walking close to the basement door, but every time I passed it, I felt a tightness in my stomach. I made an excuse to check the heating system in the basement once, but the landlord gave me a firm no. He said the heating system was separate and nothing for me to worry about. His tone was sharper now. He told me not to mess with things that did not concern me. One evening, I decided to try something else. I set my phone on video mode and propped it up in the hallway facing the basement door. I covered the screen with a shirt so it would not glow. I left it recording and went to my room. I waited an hour, then went back to get it. I took it into my room and watched the footage. For the first half hour, nothing happened. Then about 45 minutes in, I saw a slight movement. The door seemed to vibrate a little. It was subtle, like it was being pushed from inside. The padlock did not move, but the frame looked like it flexed just a tiny bit. I heard a very soft scraping sound on the video. After a few seconds, it stopped. When I watched that, my heart started pounding. I could feel sweat on my forehead. Something was definitely inside. I did not know what. I did not want to believe something was trapped there, but I did not see another explanation. I thought about buying some tools and trying to open the door when the landlord was away. But that seemed dangerous. I did not want to get kicked out or start a fight with him. A few nights later, I tried to talk to one of the other tenants. He was a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself. I asked him if he ever noticed anything strange about the basement door. He looked at me for a moment and then said he never paid attention. He said he worked long hours and did not care what the landlord kept down there. He seemed uncomfortable, like he did not want to get involved. I let it go. I tried to ignore the door for a couple of weeks. The landlord seemed calmer when I stopped bringing it up. I focused on my work. I tried to sleep better, but the scratching did not stop. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up and hear it. It was not every night, but enough to keep me on edge. I felt my stomach tense every time. My heart would beat fast. I would hold my breath and listen. Sometimes it stopped quickly. Other times it went on for a few minutes. I never heard anyone else react. Maybe the others slept through it or just did not care. Then the landlord reinforced the door again. I came home one day and the entire frame looked thicker. He must have installed extra wood or metal inside. The padlock was bigger. The hinges looked heavier. The scratches were gone because he repainted it. For a few days, everything seemed quiet. I thought maybe whatever was inside had stopped trying to get out. I almost relaxed. But about a week later, I saw new scratch marks. This time they were smaller, but they were there. I also noticed the bottom of the door frame had a slight gap, as if something had tried to push outward. There were tiny splinters on the floor again. I felt my throat go dry. I thought about confronting the landlord directly, but I did not want to cause trouble. Instead, I decided to try a different approach. One night, I waited until late, when the house was silent. I put on some old clothes and took a flashlight. I approached the door and knelt down. I shone the flashlight at the bottom gap. The gap was small, but I could see darkness beyond it. The smell was stronger now. It smelled musty, like wet earth and old wood. I could feel a cool draft coming from inside. I tried to poke a small metal ruler through the gap, just to feel what was inside. It hit something solid after a few inches. Then I heard a scratch, much louder this time. It came from inside, right near where I was poking. I jerked my hand back, stood up, and stumbled away. My heart was racing. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. I backed away and went to my room, locked the door, and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I heard one or two more faint scratches after that, then silence. The next morning, the landlord knocked on my door. He looked angry. He said, "Don't mess with the basement." I'm serious. I did not ask how he knew. Maybe he heard me, or maybe he saw the flashlight beam under the door. I just nodded and said, "Okay." He stared at me for a few seconds and then left. I felt embarrassed, but also scared. He knew I was suspicious. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about what was behind that door. It could be an animal, maybe a large dog or something else locked inside. But why would he keep it locked up down there? Why scratch at the door? It did not sound like it was being fed or let out. It never cried or made any noise except scratching. It never escaped. The landlord always kept the door locked. I had no explanation. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere cheaper to go at that moment, and my lease still had months left. Over the next days, I slept lightly. Every small noise woke me up. Sometimes I would sit in the living room during the day, staring at that door, waiting for something to happen. Nothing ever happened while I watched. But at night, when everything was quiet, I would hear faint sounds. It never got any worse than that, but it never stopped either. I tried recording audio one night, placing my phone near the door and letting it run for hours. When I listened the next day, I heard faint scratching at random intervals. Sometimes a few soft thumps, like something pushing against the wood. The landlord never admitted anything. He started avoiding me. The other tenants seemed to mind their own business. No one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to get involved. I felt alone. I felt tense all the time, worried that something would break through that door, or that I would do something stupid and get kicked out. I ended up living in that place for several more months. The scratching never stopped. The door stayed locked. The landlord made more repairs, adding more layers of wood and metal. The smell never went away. I kept all this to myself. I waited out my lease. On my last night there, I sat in my room listening. The scratching continued, steady and quiet. I never found out what caused it. I never saw anything come out. I never saw inside that basement. I do not know if anyone else ever tried to open it. I packed my things and left the next morning. The landlord barely said goodbye. I never asked him again. I never got an explanation. I can still remember the sound of those scratches, though. It never left my mind. I remember that evening clearly. It was early fall and the sky had a dim orange glow. The air felt cool. I was jogging in the park near my neighborhood. This park sits on the edge of a quiet suburb. It has a few benches, some scattered trash cans, a small duck pond, and a paved path that loops around. There's a line of bushes along one side and a couple of lampposts that only turn on after dark. Nothing special. I'd been running there for a few weeks to keep my mind off work. My shifts had been long and tense, and running helped me calm down. I never expected anything strange. Everything always felt normal there. Safe enough. Nothing out of place. That night, I started my jog just before sunset. By the time I reached the far side of the loop, the sky had gotten darker and there were fewer people around. I saw an older man walking a small dog about 20 yards away. He was heading toward the parking lot. I saw a young woman doing some stretches at a pull-up bar near the entrance. Besides them, not many people. I liked that. I didn't enjoy crowded spaces. I just wanted a quiet run. I was at a slow, steady pace, breathing through my nose, relaxing my shoulders. Everything seemed fine. I passed one of the benches. It was old, with chipped green paint and a couple of scratched initials on the side. I'd seen it many times. But this time I caught a glimpse of something moving underneath it. It was fast, a sudden shift of a shape. It wasn't a small animal like a squirrel or a rat. It was bigger, too big to be a cat. It had a human-sized shape. I saw what looked like a shoulder, or maybe a back and some sort of arm bending in a strange way. I slowed down. My heart thumped harder, not from running, but from confusion. I wondered if someone was hurt, or maybe playing a prank. It wasn't Halloween yet, but kids sometimes messed around. Or maybe it was a homeless person trying to stay out of sight. I'm not some brave hero, but I can't just run off if I see someone who might need help. So I stepped off the path and walked toward the bench. As I approached, I tried to look under it. The light was weak, but I could still see. I crouched a bit, careful not to stumble. The grass felt damp. The smell of the nearby pond drifted by, kind of stale and earthy. I saw the shape move again, fast. I noticed that it moved on all fours, but not like a normal person crawling. Its limbs bent in ways that didn't look right. The joints stuck out at angles that made my stomach tighten. There was a scraping sound against the dirt. Its head turned toward me, but I couldn't see its face clearly. Just a suggestion of dark eyes and tight skin. Before I could say anything, it shot forward. It didn't stand up. It just crawled at high speed toward a storm drain on the edge of the park's small gutter system. I only got a quick look. The thing wore something loose, maybe torn clothing or rags. Its movement was jerky and quiet, except for the scrape of its hands or feet on the ground. It reached the drain cover, lifted it with one hand, and slipped inside. The metal cover dropped back with a dull clang. I stood there, my mouth open, my heart hammered. I felt sweat drip down my back. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. I wasn't sure if it was a person or something else. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a very agile, desperate, homeless person. But the way it moved unsettled me. It didn't seem normal. I leaned over to look at the drain cover. It looked like a standard metal grate, heavy-looking with small holes. I tried to lift it, but it barely budged. I didn't understand how that thing had moved it so easily. I walked back toward the path. I felt a little shaky. My legs felt weak. I glanced around. No one was near me now. The old man with the dog was gone. The woman at the pull-up bar was probably gone too. I only heard a distant car and some insects. The park lights were starting to flicker on. I stood there thinking about what to do. Calling the police crossed my mind, but I had no idea what to tell them. I saw someone crawling under a bench and then going into a drain. It sounded ridiculous. They'd probably think I was messing with them or that I saw a weird animal, but I knew what I saw looked human, or close to it. I decided to head home. I jogged back at a faster pace, my eyes scanning every bench and corner. I kept imagining something rushing out from behind a trash can. Nothing else happened on my way out, though. I got to my car, sat inside for a moment with the doors locked, and tried to calm down. My breathing was loud in the quiet car. I wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't. At home, I took a shower and tried to eat something simple. My stomach felt tight. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the way it moved, the way it lifted that heavy cover so easily. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing that faint scraping sound in my head. The next day at work, I was distracted. I answered a few emails, dealt with a few phone calls, but my mind drifted. I considered telling a coworker, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot. Maybe I would go back to the park in daylight to check that drain. Maybe I would find a clue. After work, I drove to the same spot, parked my car, and walked over to the bench. The sun was still out, a normal afternoon, people jogging, walking dogs, sitting around. Nothing strange. I looked at the bench. I bent down, pretending to tie my shoe. I glanced underneath. Just dirt, some fallen leaves, a plastic wrapper. I checked the drain cover, it was still there. I tried lifting it again. It barely moved. I'm not a weightlifter, but I'm not weak either. That thing had lifted and moved it aside in a second, then slipped in. I felt my heart pick up speed again. I started walking around the park, looking at the other drain covers. They all seemed identical. I wondered where these drains led, probably to a sewer system beneath the neighborhood. I tried not to think too hard about it. I decided to talk to my friend Nick about it. Nick lives a few blocks away and knows a lot about the area. I called him and told him I needed to talk in person. We met at a cheap pizza place nearby. We grabbed a table. The place smelled like cheese and garlic. It was about half full. I lowered my voice and told him everything. He stared at me, his expression flat. He asked if I was tired or had been drinking. I said no. He asked if I was sure it wasn't a raccoon or something. I said it was definitely bigger, human-shaped, and it lifted that grate. He shook his head. He said he never heard about anything like that. He suggested I call the cops if I saw it again. He looked uneasy. We didn't talk much after that. I felt frustrated. I knew what I saw, but I had no proof. I went back home, thinking I should just leave it alone. Maybe it was some weird encounter that would never happen again. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next few days I avoided the park. I ran on a treadmill at the gym. I tried to pretend nothing happened. But every night before sleeping, I felt that same tension. I kept picturing that figure under the bench, those strange limbs bending, the sudden movement into the drain. After a week, I decided to go back to the park at the same time of day, around dusk. I wanted to see if it would appear again. Part of me hoped it was gone. Another part wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. I brought a small flashlight with me and kept it in my pocket. I wore running clothes and tried to act normal. I jogged around, pretending to enjoy the evening air. There were a few people around, so I took my time. After 2 laps, most people had left. The light was fading and I felt the same anxious feeling in my chest. I approached the same bench, moving casually. I slowed down and made a show of checking my phone. Then I crouched slightly and looked underneath. The space was empty. Just a few leaves and some dirt. Nothing strange. I got up and took a few steps toward the drain cover. I pretended to stretch my legs and, while leaning down, I quickly shined my flashlight through the holes of the cover. I saw concrete walls and a slight trickle of water. Nothing else. But I noticed a smell, a faint, damp smell coming from below. I stood back up and tried to decide what to do next. The park was quiet. The streetlights were coming on. I could hear distant traffic. Suddenly, I heard a rustling behind me. I turned around. Something moved behind the bushes near another bench about 15 yards away. I felt my skin crawl. I took a few steps toward it, shining my flashlight. The beam caught a glimpse of something pale and thin. It moved quickly behind the bench. I could hear a scraping sound again. My breathing became shallow, and my hands trembled. I took out my phone and held it in my left hand, ready to call someone if I needed to. I walked slowly, keeping the flashlight aimed low. I didn't want to scare whoever it was, but I also didn't want them to catch me off guard. I approached the bench and looked underneath. Nothing. I moved around it, scanning the ground. Then I saw the metal cover of another drain slightly raised. It was on the opposite side of the bench, partly hidden by the edge of a bush. The cover looked heavy, but it was angled upward, leaving a small gap. I stepped closer. My heart pounded. I tried to shine the light inside. Suddenly, the cover slammed down. I jumped back and nearly fell. My breath came in short bursts. I stood there, shaking, looking at that drain cover. I knew something was down there. It was strong. It was fast. I didn't know what it wanted. It never said anything. It never made a sound besides that scraping. I wanted to call the police right then, but what would I say? That I saw someone hiding in the sewers who crawled around at dusk? I backed away, keeping my eyes on the drain. After a few steps, I turned around and jogged out of the park. My legs felt stiff, and I couldn't run well. I felt exposed, like something might pop out behind a tree. But I made it to my car. I locked the doors and looked back at the park. It was quiet and dark. I could see the lampposts and the path. Everything looked normal from a distance, but I knew better. When I got home, I locked my front door and closed all the windows. I paced around the living room, thinking about what to do. I didn't want to ignore it. I was afraid that if this thing was dangerous, someone else might get hurt or freaked out. But I also didn't have any clear proof. Maybe I could try recording a video next time. But did I even want to go back? Over the next few days, I looked online for anything about strange sightings in suburban parks. I found nothing useful. Just stories about coyotes, stray dogs, or raccoons. Nothing like what I saw. I thought about telling the police, but I knew how it would sound. I did call the non-emergency line once and said I saw a suspicious person in the park sewers. The person on the line took my information and said they would send someone to check it out. I never heard back from them. I doubted they found anything. I stayed away from that park for 2 weeks. I ran elsewhere, even though I preferred the convenience of that place. I tried to sleep better. I tried to forget. But I felt uneasy, like I had left something unresolved. One afternoon, I decided to drive by the park just to see if there were any changes. I parked and walked around it in daylight. There were people there, kids playing on the grass. I didn't interact with them or pay attention to them as requested. Adults chatting and a couple of joggers. Everything was normal. I checked the benches. I checked the drains. Everything looked sealed and in place. Nothing strange. I never saw it again. But sometimes at night, when I think about it, I remember the way it moved. It was silent and fast. Its limbs bent oddly. Its skin looked tight and pale. I remember the scraping sound and the heavy drain cover lifting with ease. I remember how alone I felt in that moment and how unsure I was about what I was dealing with. I have no answers. I don't know if it was a human who lived underground, someone hiding from society, or something else entirely. All I know is that I saw it. It looked right at me before it disappeared. It made no sound, no words, gave no explanation. It went into the sewer like it belonged there. The memory still makes my stomach tighten. I keep my doors locked at night. I avoid jogging at dusk in quiet places. If I need to run outdoors, I pick well-lit, crowded areas. I try not to think about what else might be lurking underneath old benches and drain covers, but I know I won't forget what I saw, and I know I won't go looking for it again. I got to the distribution center around 11 at night. There were 2 other guys scheduled, but one called in sick, and the other one was working on the opposite end of the building. He was nowhere near the loading docks. The place was big and mostly quiet, just the hum of the overhead lights and a distant engine sound from the refrigeration units. My routine was the same as always. Punch in, check the schedule, see which pallets needed unloading, move boxes, and keep an eye on the cameras. Most nights felt the same. I didn't expect anything different. I just wanted to get through my shift without falling asleep on my feet. After about an hour, I was sorting through some cartons near Dock 12. The lights above that area tended to flicker sometimes, but it was never anything dramatic. That night, though, something felt off. I noticed a slight metallic clinking sound at first. It sounded like chains, but I couldn't place where it was coming from. It wasn't loud. It was more like a distant scraping noise, metal links sliding across concrete. I stood still and listened. All I heard was the hum of lights and the occasional rumble of a distant truck on the highway outside. I shrugged it off and kept working. Another hour passed, and I went back to the security office to check the monitors. We had several cameras covering the docks, the aisles, and the storage areas. The images were mostly still shots of stacked pallets and empty corridors. I took a sip of my cold coffee and tried not to yawn. Then I heard it again. The chain sound, this time louder. It was sharp and clear. I put the coffee down and leaned toward the door. The noise came from somewhere near Dock 16, a spot that was supposed to be empty that night. We had no trucks scheduled there, no pallets scheduled for loading or unloading in that area. It was just an empty dock with the overhead door closed. I went out of the security room and walked toward the dock area. My boots tapped against the concrete floor. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a loose chain on some equipment. I passed Dock 14 and 15. The lights in that section were steady, no flicker. Everything looked normal. I stepped in front of Dock 16 and stood there. It was just a closed overhead door and a flat concrete floor in front of it. Nothing else. No trucks, no pallets, no chains. I listened closely. The place was silent, except for a slight buzzing from a light fixture overhead. As I turned to head back, I heard a loud crash behind me. It was so sudden and intense that I felt my stomach tighten. I spun around and stared at the door. Something had made a thunderous noise right there. I couldn't see any damage. The door looked intact. There was nothing on the floor. I could still feel the vibration in my chest. It felt like something heavy had slammed into metal. I took a step forward and ran my hand along the door's surface. It was cool to the touch, solid as always. I walked back to the security office, my legs feeling a little shaky. I wanted to check the cameras to see if I could spot anything unusual. Maybe a raccoon got inside. Maybe the building settled. I tried to come up with explanations that made sense. Inside the security room, I rewound the footage from the camera that covered Dock 16. The footage showed me approaching the door, standing there, then turning around. Then it showed me reacting to the noise. But there was something else. As I watched carefully, I noticed my shadow on the ground in the footage. It stretched out from my feet, cast by the overhead lights. Right after the noise, I saw something strange. My shadow moved on its own. It didn't match my body movements. I saw myself spin around and my shadow lagged behind, as if it needed a moment to catch up. For a second, my shadow's shape flickered and shifted without me moving. It was like it was alive and adjusting itself. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I stared at the screen, rewinding and playing that part over and over. It wasn't a glitch in the camera. The rest of the footage was smooth. Only my shadow looked wrong. I could see my hands shaking a bit as I tapped the keyboard. I tried switching cameras, checking if some weird angle of light was causing it. Every other angle just confirmed what I saw. My shadow wasn't synced with my body. I didn't know how to handle that. I felt my mouth go dry. I went back out into the main area and stood under the lights. I looked down at my shadow and moved my arm. My shadow followed. I lifted my foot. My shadow lifted its foot. Everything seemed normal in person, but on the camera feed it looked wrong. I had to confirm this. I grabbed a small handheld camera from the supply room. I turned it on and aimed it at myself under the overhead lights. I recorded a few seconds of footage, then played it back on the tiny screen. In that handheld recording, I looked normal. My shadow moved with me. So why did the security cameras show something different? I returned to the security room and watched the live feed again. I stood where I knew camera 3 could see me. On the live monitor, I lifted my right hand. My shadow paused for just a fraction of a second before copying me. I blinked hard and lifted my left foot. Again, a tiny delay. This wasn't in my head. The security cameras were showing my shadow moving on its own, just a split second off from my body. I felt sweat on my forehead. My arms felt cold. I didn't know who to call. The other guy working was at the far end of the center, and I didn't want to sound insane. He was a part-timer who barely spoke to me. I tried to calm down. I needed to figure this out. I checked the entire perimeter of the dock area. Nothing was out of place. All pallets were accounted for. No chains lying around. No equipment unhooked. I kept hearing that chain sound in my head, even though it was quiet now. I decided to test something. I stood in front of camera 3's coverage area and tried to trick my shadow. I moved quickly. A short hop, a sudden crouch, a wave of my arm. On the monitor, my shadow reacted slower than my actual body. It was like a half-second behind. Sometimes I saw it jerk awkwardly as if it had to force itself to keep up with me. I felt my stomach clench. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing changed. I didn't know what the hell to do. This wasn't normal, and I had no explanation. I felt like I was losing control of my environment. The air smelled like dust and old cardboard. The concrete floor felt rough under my boots. The overhead lights buzzed. My breathing was short and uneven. I had a knot in my chest. I walked the length of the loading docks, checking each door. Everything was locked and secure. The noise I heard earlier had no source. I went to the electrical room to see if there was something wrong with the wiring or the lights. Everything looked in order. A bunch of cables, boxes, and switches. No sign of tampering. I flicked a few switches just to see if there was a loose connection. The lights stayed the same. The cameras stayed the same. I tried calling the other guy on the radio. I didn't want to say what was really going on. I just said, "Hey, you notice anything weird tonight?" He replied with a lazy, "No, everything's normal here." I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound crazy. I thanked him and put the radio down. My hands were shaking again. I checked the cameras again. On one of the feeds, I could still see my shadow flickering oddly. I stepped out into that area and looked at the floor. My shadow looked normal to my naked eye. I squatted down and touched the floor. It was cool and smooth. My heart pounded. I stood up and snapped my fingers in front of my face. I was trying to stay alert. Then I heard the chain sound again, louder this time. It echoed from somewhere near Dock 20. I headed that way, feeling my pulse in my neck. My flashlight beam was steady. The overhead lights were bright enough, but I wanted the flashlight for comfort. Dock 20 was empty, door closed, no cargo scheduled. I approached it slowly. I listened. Nothing. I looked around. A few metal hooks on the wall, a coil of rope, some spare wooden pallets stacked up. Nothing that would explain the chain sound. Then I heard another loud bang, like something heavy smashing into steel. This time it came from behind me. I spun around, breathing fast. There was no one there. I ran back to the security office, feeling sweat roll down my back. I needed to check the cameras again. Maybe I could see something move, something that would explain it. I replayed the last few minutes of footage from cameras 19 and 20. I saw myself arrive at dock 20. I saw myself stand there, looking around. On the screen as I turned, my shadow stretched out on the floor behind me. It seemed to slide out longer than it should have, like it was trying to break free from me. Then, right when I heard the bang, the footage showed my shadow jerk violently, as if it had been hit or startled by something. I saw that with my own eyes on the screen. My shadow looked like it was reacting on its own, not just following my movements. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the monitors. My mouth felt dry. I sipped some water and tried not to drop the bottle because my hand was shaking so hard. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't explain this. I decided to record the screen with my phone. I held my phone up and recorded the footage from the monitors. Now I had evidence in a device I could hold. I watched the phone playback. The weird movement was right there. It wasn't my imagination. I tried something else. I stepped out into camera 3's area again and stood perfectly still. I wanted to see if my shadow moved without me moving. I stood like a statue, not even blinking, and then checked the monitor feed. The live image showed me standing still, but my shadow twitched slightly. Its arm stretched a bit when mine didn't. I nearly dropped the phone. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I needed to leave. I felt trapped in this place. The shift wasn't over, but I didn't care. I walked toward the exit door at the side of the building near the offices. The door was locked from outside, but we had a key. I took out my key and tried it. The door wouldn't open. I twisted the key again. The lock turned, but the door stayed shut, like something was pushing it from outside. I pulled harder, grunting under my breath, but it was stuck. I felt panic building in my chest. I went to the main entrance. It was the door we all used to come in at the start of the shift. That door had a keypad code. I typed in the code. The lock clicked, but the door didn't open. I pressed my shoulder against it. It felt like it was welded shut. I stepped back, breathing hard, and kicked the door. It didn't budge. The sound echoed in the empty reception area. The overhead lights flickered once. I went back into the warehouse, looking for something heavy to force the door. I grabbed a long metal pry bar from a maintenance shelf. I tried to wedge it into the door frame. The metal squealed, but the door stayed put. My muscles strained. My hands got red and sore. I gave up for a moment and leaned against the wall, breathing through my mouth. My throat felt tight. I decided to check on the other guy. I walked all the way across the distribution center, calling his name. The place was huge and filled with stacked boxes, pallets, and racks of inventory. My voice echoed. He didn't answer. I checked the office area where he usually worked. Empty. No sign of him. His stuff was there, his jacket on the chair, his half-finished soda on the desk. But he wasn't around. I pulled out my phone and tried calling him. No signal. I tried calling anyone else. No signal. I pressed my phone against my forehead and closed my eyes for a second. I needed another plan. I looked up at the cameras mounted on the high beams. They stared down at me with their small red lights. I wondered if anyone was watching from some remote location. Probably not. I heard the chain sound again. It came from above this time. I looked up at the rafters. I saw nothing but metal beams and cables. The sound scraped across my ears, then stopped. I shone my flashlight upward. Nothing. Just steel and dust. I walked back toward the docks, thinking maybe I could open one of the overhead doors. Even if there was no truck, I could just open the door and slip out. But the overhead doors required a keypad as well. I tried one. The keypad beeped, but the door didn't move. I tried another. Same thing. I yanked on the manual release chain. It was stuck. I pulled harder. The chain didn't budge. It felt like it was welded to the gear. I stood there, breathing heavily, my body sweating. My back ached. My arms felt weak. I clenched my teeth. I needed to calm down and think straight. I walked to the security office and checked the monitors one more time. The building looked the same on every feed, just a big empty warehouse with boxes, docks, and lights, except for the camera that showed me in real time when I stood there. On that camera, my shadow still twitched now and then, as if it were alive. I decided to confront it directly. I stood under that camera and shouted at my shadow. I waved my arms and stomped my feet. On the monitor, I saw my shadow react with those slight delays and weird twitches. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I tried turning off the lights in that section, hoping if there was no light, there'd be no shadow. I found the switch and flicked it off. That part of the warehouse went dark. I checked the monitor. The screen showed a dim image, barely any shadows visible. For a moment I relaxed, but then I saw it. Even in the dim light, my shadow appeared faintly, and it still didn't match my body perfectly. It was like I couldn't escape it. I turned the lights back on and stood there, thinking of what to do next. I decided to try the main door again. Maybe something changed. I walked fast, my boots squeaking on the floor. I reached the door and pulled on it. It opened without resistance. A gust of cool night air hit my face. I stumbled out, breathing hard, looking around the empty parking lot. The sky was dark, the lamps in the lot buzzing. The building behind me looked normal. I tried to understand why the door opened now. I decided not to question it. I just wanted to get to my car and leave. I looked down at the ground under the parking lot lights. My shadow stretched out in front of me, connected to my feet, moving exactly as I moved. It looked normal. I walked to my car and got in. I turned on the engine and checked the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, my face sweaty. In the headlights, I saw my shadow once more. It looked fine. I drove away, my heart pounding, feeling relief with every passing second. I didn't look back. I just wanted to get home and sit in silence. I never reported what happened. I left that job the next week. I didn't explain my reasons. I just said it wasn't for me. The manager looked at me a bit confused, but he didn't ask many questions. I was glad. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to think about it. As far as I know, that place is still running at night with different people working the docks. I wonder if anyone else ever heard chains or saw their shadow move on its own. I don't plan on ever finding out. I pulled into my driveway late that night. The rain had been coming down hard for hours and the streets were quiet. No one was outside. The gutters were overflowing. There were branches on the road, and the headlights of my car reflected off the slick pavement. I parked right in front of my house, turned off the engine, and listened to the heavy raindrops hitting the roof. I felt exhausted. I had been working a long shift, and my clothes were damp from sprinting through the rain after stopping for some groceries. I remember checking the back seat before I got out. It was a habit. I never left anything valuable in there, but I looked anyway. Everything seemed normal. The doors were locked the second I shut them, and I ran up to my front door, hunching forward to keep my head dry. Inside, I dropped my keys on the kitchen table and wiped my face with a towel. I tried to relax, but that uneasy feeling settled in my stomach for no clear reason. I stayed up for about an hour, flipping through some mindless TV shows. I remember the sound of the rain getting worse. The house felt small and dark, and the light in my living room buzzed slightly. I shut the TV off and decided to get some sleep. The storm outside made it hard to rest. I got up once around midnight and looked out the window at my car. The streetlights made the rain shine on the asphalt. I didn't see anything strange. The car sat where I left it. I didn't think much of it. When I woke up in the morning, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. The sky was still gray. I had to head out to run an errand. I took my keys and stepped outside. The The ground was wet and my shoes made a soft splashing sound on the small puddles in the driveway. I opened the driver's door and got in. The interior smelled the same as always, a mix of old fabric and a hint of coffee from a spill months ago. I put the key in the ignition, but before turning it, I glanced into my rearview mirror. That's when I saw it. On the inside of the back window, there was a single handprint. It was a clear, distinct print. The fingers were spread out slightly, and it looked fresh. The condensation from the rainy night must have made the interior surfaces damp enough to show marks. But I had no reason for there to be a handprint on the inside. I never had anyone in the back seat, not yesterday, not recently. I sat there staring. The car had been locked. I always checked. No windows were broken. Nothing was out of place. It was just a single, perfect handprint. My heart started to beat faster and my palms began to sweat. I turned around and looked closely. I leaned over into the back seat area to see if there was anything else. The upholstery was dry. There were no footprints, no dirt. The doors and windows were fine. The handprint had to be human. It was too detailed. I touched the glass next to it. The glass felt cool and slightly damp. I placed my own hand next to the print. It was smaller than mine. I pulled my hand away quickly. My skin tingled. I got out of the car and walked around it. I looked at the trunk. It was locked. I opened it anyway. It was empty. No one could have hidden in there. I checked all the doors. They were locked. None of the locks were damaged. I had 2 keys, one in my hand, one inside the house. No one else had a copy. I looked at the ground around the car. There were no unusual footprints or marks in the mud. Just rain-soaked pavement, a bit of debris, and my own footprints from last night. I walked back into the house, feeling unsettled. I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath. I considered calling someone, maybe the police, but what would I say? That a handprint appeared inside my locked car overnight? It sounded ridiculous. I thought about calling a friend, but I felt embarrassed. It might be nothing. Maybe I had touched the window myself at some point, but why would I do that? And my hands are larger. Also, I never sit in the back. I never had anyone in there. It made no sense. I forced myself to calm down. I told myself to think logically. I went back to the car and wiped the print off with a cloth. My hand shook while I did it. Then I got into the driver's seat and drove off to do my errand. While driving, I kept glancing into the rear-view mirror, expecting something else to appear. Nothing did. The rest of the day was uneventful. I came back home, parked in the same spot, locked the car, and went inside. The rain had stopped by then, and the afternoon was quiet. I tried to watch TV, eat something, and relax. But I kept looking out the window toward my car. My chest felt heavy. My breathing grew shallow whenever I thought about that handprint. Later that evening, I went out again to the car with a flashlight. It was dark, and the streetlight was dim. I checked the interior thoroughly. I ran my hand along the back seat. The fabric felt normal. I looked under the seats. I checked the glove compartment. I looked at the doors for any signs of forced entry. There was nothing. The air inside smelled slightly stale, but otherwise normal. Everything looked as it should, except for that memory of the handprint. I locked the car again and stood in the driveway, feeling the damp air on my face. I heard the distant sound of a neighbor's TV through a closed window. I heard water dripping from the roof gutters. I stood there for a while, trying to catch any noise that might give me a hint. Nothing stood out. I went inside. I locked the door. I switched on several lights. My stomach felt cramped. I felt a dull ache at the back of my neck. I took a long shower and changed into clean clothes. I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but I couldn't shake it. I kept going to the windows and looking outside. Everything was normal. No suspicious cars, no people lurking, nothing. Just my car and the wet street. I didn't sleep well. I woke up several times during the night and looked out the window. I kept checking that my car was still there and that no one was around. I felt stupid, but I couldn't help it. Each time I looked, I remembered that strange handprint. I tried to convince myself that I had somehow made the print, or that it was old and I only noticed it now. But it was too distinct. My memory was clear about that window. I cleaned my car often enough to know every spot. The next morning I woke up with a headache. It was early. The sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped. The car looked fine from the outside. I made coffee and forced down a piece of toast. Then I decided to check the car again just to settle my nerves. When I opened the door, I was careful and observant. I checked all the windows. No new prints. I checked the back window where I had found the mark. It was spotless, just as I had left it after wiping it down. I sat in the back seat. It felt uncomfortable being there. I never usually sat back there. I looked around from that perspective. I saw the back of the driver's seat, a few strands of lint, and a small scuff mark on the door panel from my groceries at some point. I opened and closed the doors, checking the locks carefully. Everything functioned as expected. I pressed the door seals, looking for gaps. They were tight. No water had leaked inside. No sign of forced entry. I leaned closer to the back window and breathed on it, just to see how a fresh print would look. My breath fogged the glass. I pressed my hand gently and pulled it away. The print I left looked very much like the one I found yesterday, except my hand was bigger, and I knew I made this one. The old print was smaller. It looked more like a woman's hand, or maybe a young adult's. But I wasn't allowed to think about that. I had no idea who could have done it. There had been no one else in my car. I had no visitors. I had not driven anyone around. I had no reason for a stranger's hand to appear inside my window. I spent the day doing normal things: laundry, cleaning the kitchen, paying a couple of bills online. I tried to move on. By late afternoon, I started to feel uneasy again. I looked outside, and my car was still there, just as I left it. I decided I would do one more test before dark. I would leave the car locked and go check it a few hours later to see if something changed. Maybe the weird weather caused some sort of condensation pattern, but that wouldn't explain a perfect handprint with distinct fingers. Around 9 p.m., I went out with my flashlight. The neighborhood was quiet again. I looked through the windows without opening the car. Everything seemed fine. I didn't see any prints. I tried the doors. Still locked. I clicked the key fob to unlock, then lock it again, just to confirm the sound of the locks engaging. It was solid. I walked around my house, shining the flashlight at the bushes, checking if someone was hiding. I saw no one. I looked at the dark windows of the other houses. People were inside watching TV or sleeping. There was no suspicious movement. I went back inside. I felt tired and tense. My neck and shoulders were stiff. My stomach hurt a bit. I drank some water and tried to watch something on TV. I couldn't focus. The sound of the show was dull and my eyes kept drifting to the window. Finally, I decided to sleep. I made sure every door and window in my house was locked. I checked them twice. My heart beat faster as I thought about the car sitting outside. I turned off the lights and went to bed, feeling uneasy. I woke up again in the middle of the night. It was about 3 a.m. I had to check. I couldn't stop myself. I got dressed and went to the front window. I moved the curtain slightly. The car looked the same under the streetlight's glow. I could see the reflection of a nearby sign on the windshield. Nothing else, but I couldn't go back to sleep, so I stepped outside quietly. The pavement was cold under my shoes. I approached the car from the rear. With the flashlight off, I used the faint light from the street. I pressed my face close to the glass. The interior was dark. I saw the shape of the seats and the faint outline of the dashboard. No movement. I exhaled. I began to relax. Then I turned on the flashlight and aimed it inside, scanning slowly. Front seats, back seats, floor, windows. Nothing. Just empty space. I felt relieved for a moment. I turned to go back inside when something made me look again. The back window from inside still looked clean. I leaned closer. I didn't see a print. Good. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to sleep. I kept thinking about the handprint. If I never see it again, maybe I can forget it. Maybe it was some weird moment where I didn't remember touching the glass, but I remembered everything clearly. It was driving me crazy, but I decided I had to let it go. The next few days, I checked the car less frequently. I drove it around as usual. I watched it carefully each time I got in and out. No new prints appeared. The memory of that night started to fade. I still felt a bit paranoid, but I tried to return to normal life. The weather cleared up. The sun came out a few times. I washed the car and vacuumed the interior. I felt a bit nervous doing that, but I got through it. Everything looked normal. I worked, I ate, I slept. Nothing strange happened again, but I can't forget the moment I first saw that handprint. The feeling in my stomach, the sweat in my palms, the way my heart thumped. I can't forget the tension in my shoulders as I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it will always remain a weird mystery. All I know is that I locked the car. I checked it thoroughly. Yet there was that single, clear handprint on the inside of the rear window, appearing out of nowhere on a stormy night. And I never found out how it got there. I remember that night in clear detail. It was late, probably well past midnight. I had been cleaning my uncle's old house for hours. I had inherited it a few weeks before, and the place was full of dust and old junk that needed to be cleared out before I could put it on the market. I was tired and hungry, but I wanted to finish at least one full round of cleaning before heading home. The house was old, with creaky wood floors and chipped paint on the walls, and it felt stale. I kept the lights on in the main rooms and used a flashlight in the darker corners. The silence of the place started to feel heavy. While I was downstairs in the living room, sweeping dust toward a plastic sheet, I heard heavy footsteps on the floor above me. It wasn't a random creak or a settling beam. It sounded like someone walking slowly, one step after another, across the wooden floor in the upstairs hallway. The steps were firm, not hurried, and definitely not just the wind or the house settling. I stood still for a moment, holding the broom tight. I listened to see if the steps would continue. They did, maybe 3 or 4 steps, then stopped. The hair on my arm stood up. My heart started pounding. I didn't say anything out loud right then. I just took a breath, put the broom down, and decided to go upstairs and see what was going on. I had locked the doors. No one should have been there. I took my flashlight and went up the staircase slowly, my shoes making soft scraping sounds against the worn steps. At the top, I stood in the hallway. I shone the flashlight around. The hall was long and had several rooms on each side. The dust in the beam of light drifted slowly. I checked the floorboards. They were covered in dust. If anyone had walked there, I should have seen footprints. The dust was thick and untouched, like no one had walked there in months. The wood surface was smooth and grayish with dust. No shoe prints, no smears. I stepped into each room, shining the flashlight around. Old furniture with sheets draped over them, empty closets, peeling wallpaper, dusty floors. Nothing moved, no fresh tracks, nothing. I swallowed hard and felt my throat go dry. I went back downstairs, shaking my head, trying to convince myself I had misheard something. Maybe an old pipe or some animal in the attic. But it hadn't sounded like an animal. It was too steady, too much like a human step. Back in the living room, I picked up the broom again and tried to focus on my work. I wanted to get done and leave. The sooner I finished, the sooner I could lock up and go. I started sweeping again, but after a few minutes I heard the footsteps a second time. Heavy steps above me, crossing the floor. This time I felt a jolt in my stomach. I turned off the vacuum I had just switched on and listened. 1, 2, 3 steps, then silence. I hurried upstairs, skipping the last 2 steps, and looked around again. Nothing disturbed, no footprints, dust untouched. I stood there sweating, my shirt sticking to my back. I checked every room, opening closet doors fully, looking behind old chairs. I listened at the attic door. Just silence. I tried talking. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed. I got no answer. I felt ridiculous talking to empty rooms. I went back downstairs and tried to work again. I kept turning my head, listening. Each time I started to relax, the footsteps would come back. They were always slow, heavy, and always above wherever I stood. If I was in the living room, they were directly above in the hallway. If I moved to the kitchen, the steps would be above the kitchen. But no matter how fast I moved upstairs, I never caught anyone. The dust was always the same, undisturbed. After maybe an hour of this back and forth, I started feeling tightness in my chest. My hands shook. My mouth went dry. Sweat trickled down my temples. I had the strong feeling that someone was there, messing with me, but I couldn't prove it. I tried setting little traps. I placed small pieces of paper on the hallway floor, hoping someone's shoe would knock them aside. I placed them in a neat line, then went downstairs and waited. After a few minutes, the footsteps started again. I rushed upstairs. The papers were still there, untouched, lined up exactly as I left them. I spoke aloud. "I don't know who you are, but this isn't funny." My voice sounded weak. I waited. No response. The silence weighed on me. I leaned against a wall, breathing heavily. My heart felt like it was hammering against my ribs. I tried to think logically. Maybe old pipes or some kind of resonance. But it sounded too real. I went to the attic. I pulled down the ladder and climbed up. Dust showered onto my head. I coughed, wiping my face. With my flashlight, I checked the attic space. Just boxes, old insulation, nothing unusual. No footprints. While I was up there, I heard the footsteps on the second floor below me. They sounded just as heavy and clear, moving down the hallway. I scrambled down the attic ladder so fast I almost slipped. I ran into the hallway. Still nothing. I felt my stomach twist. I was sweating through my shirt. My breathing was shallow. The muscles in my neck were tense. My legs felt weak. I decided to open a window to get some fresh air. I opened one on the second floor and leaned out. The night was quiet and cold. I could see the empty street below, a few dim streetlights, no one around. I stayed there for a few minutes, listening for sounds outside, but heard nothing unusual. I closed the window and turned back to the hall. Everything was quiet again. I thought about leaving the house right then. I could finish cleaning another day, but I needed to get things done. I needed to prepare the place for sale, and my schedule was tight. I told myself I would ignore the noises. I went downstairs, found a bottle of water in my bag, and drank it. I tried to steady my breathing. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. Back in the living room, I started vacuuming. The vacuum's roar filled my ears. I felt less alone with the noise, even though it prevented me from hearing anything else. After a while, I shut it off and listened. Almost immediately, the footsteps started above me. My heart jumped. I forced myself to march upstairs immediately. I walked slowly, shining the flashlight, stepping carefully. The footsteps stopped as soon as I reached the top. I checked everything again, same as before. I decided to try turning off all the upstairs lights and just using my flashlight. Maybe I could catch whoever it was by surprise. I went to the fuse box downstairs, flipped the breakers for the upstairs lights, and climbed back up with my flashlight. It was very quiet. I stood still, waiting. My mouth felt dry again. After a few minutes, I heard the footsteps once more. They sounded louder in the dark. I pointed the flashlight toward the sound. I saw nothing. The dust on the floor shimmered in the flashlight beam, completely undisturbed. But I felt a slight vibration under my feet. I could feel the boards tremble as if something heavy stepped on them. I shouted, "Who's there?" I heard my voice crack. My hands shook. No answer. The footsteps stopped. I waited, holding my breath. I turned the lights back on. Everything was the same. I started feeling defeated, exhausted, and confused. I thought about checking every inch of that floor again, but I had done that repeatedly. I knew I wouldn't find anything. I felt a knot in my stomach. I had goosebumps on my arms. My shirt clung to my chest and back. I looked at my phone. The battery was low and it was late. I wanted to leave. I could come back and finish tomorrow. Maybe bring someone else with me. I gathered my cleaning tools and brought them downstairs. I packed what I could into a bag. I made sure the front door was still locked from the inside. It was. I stepped into the hallway near the front door and listened one last time. Silence. Then, as if waiting for that moment, the footsteps came again. Slow, steady steps right above me, crossing the upstairs hallway. I felt my heart race again. My throat felt tight. I gripped the doorknob. My palm was sweaty. I looked up the staircase one more time. Just empty space, dust, and stale air. I couldn't stay. I opened the front door and stepped outside into the cold night. The street was silent. I locked the door behind me, my hand shaking. As I stepped off the porch, I took a deep breath of the night air. My heart was still pounding. I looked back at the dark windows. They stared blankly at me. I got into my car and started the engine. My legs felt weak. My arms were tense. I drove away without looking back, my hands tight on the steering wheel. I kept thinking about those footsteps, so steady, so heavy, and yet leaving no trace. I had never seen anything, never found a single sign of a person. Just that sound echoing through the old wood as if mocking me. I left that night and I didn't return until I could bring someone else with me. Even then, I wasn't sure I wanted to spend another minute in that place alone. I set up my tent in a small clearing just before sunset. I chose that spot because it looked flat and the ground felt dry. There were a few thin trees scattered around and a low brush that didn't seem to hide any larger animals. The air smelled like damp leaves and the soil felt firm under my boots. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail for a while, so I assumed I would have the place to myself. I didn't mind being alone. I wanted a quiet night out, away from people, just resting and waiting for morning. After I unpacked my gear, I ate some of the snacks I carried with me and drank from my water bottle. I checked my flashlight to ensure the batteries were good, then I laid my sleeping bag inside the tent. By that time, it was getting dark. The sky had lost most of its light, and only a faint glow remained on the horizon. Inside my tent, I could still see the shape of my hand if I lifted it close to my face, but everything else looked black. I zipped up the flap and settled in, hoping to sleep early. My plan was to wake up with the sun and hike back out. I remember lying there, breathing slowly, listening to the small sounds around me. I heard crickets and some other insects clicking or buzzing quietly. The wind moved the branches and rustled the leaves. The tent's fabric shifted softly when a breeze passed. I felt calm. The day's hike had left me a bit tired, and my shoulders and calves ached. But it was a familiar ache and it wouldn't keep me from sleeping. At some point, I drifted off. I'm not sure how long I slept. It might have been a few hours. When I opened my eyes again, it was completely dark outside. The crickets were still going. I heard a small animal scurry through the underbrush. It sounded like a chipmunk or a squirrel, something light and nervous. I shifted in my sleeping bag, trying to get comfortable. My throat was a bit dry, so I reached for my water bottle and drank a few sips. That's when I heard it. Laughter. It came from the direction of the woods, not from the clearing. It was quiet at first, just a short burst of a laugh, maybe 2 or 3 quick notes. It sounded like a human voice, not an animal. At first I thought I was still half asleep and imagining it. I stayed still, holding my breath. Then I heard it again. This time it was a bit louder and it seemed closer. It sounded like a man's laugh, maybe a low chuckle. I didn't like that. I hadn't seen anyone all afternoon. I chose that spot because it was off the main path. I couldn't think of a reason for someone else to be walking around laughing in the woods this late at night. I felt my heart pick up speed. I turned onto my side and listened carefully. Another laugh came and then another. They were short and uneven. It wasn't a steady cackle. It was more like someone letting out quiet bursts of laughter for no clear reason. There was no conversation, no footsteps that I could hear, just laughter. I reached for my flashlight. I slid my hand slowly, trying not to make noise. I switched it on inside the tent. The interior lit up, and I realized I might be making myself visible. So I turned it off again, waiting. The laughter stopped for a moment. I held my breath. After maybe 30 seconds, it started again, a bit louder, and maybe even closer. Now it sounded like it was just beyond the clearing, maybe behind a few bushes. I tried to guess the distance, but it's hard in the dark. I decided I couldn't just lie there. I needed to know what was happening. I unzipped the tent slowly, careful not to let the zipper's sound carry too far. Then I pushed my head out and looked around. Everything looked dark, except for the vague shapes of trees and shrubs. The laughter had paused again. I held my flashlight, aiming it down, not turning it on yet. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed I was breathing faster through my nose. My palms felt a bit damp. I told myself it could be a camper who had drunk too much, or maybe someone who got lost and was acting strangely. But that didn't feel right. I waited in silence. Then I heard it again, to my left this time. It was definitely laughter and definitely human. The tone was odd. It didn't sound like someone genuinely enjoying a joke. It sounded forced, too uneven, sometimes cutting off in the middle of a sound. I raised my flashlight and aimed it toward where I thought the sound came from. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark trees. I saw branches, leaves, and a patch of ground covered in dead leaves. I saw no one. The laughter stopped immediately when the light shone in that direction. I held the light steady, trying not to shake. I wanted to see if someone would move, or if I could catch a glimpse of a person hiding. Nothing. I turned the flashlight off again, swallowing hard, and listened. The silence dragged on. The crickets were still chirping, but that strange laughter was gone. I considered calling out, but I didn't like the idea of revealing my exact position, or that I was alone. I decided to stay quiet. I pulled my head back inside the tent and zipped it up, leaving a small gap to listen. After a few minutes, I heard it again. This time it was on the opposite side of the clearing. The sound was clearer, and I could almost feel the presence of whoever was making it. They were not talking, just laughing. The laugh would stop whenever I turned on my flashlight. I tested it again. I leaned out and aimed the beam in that direction, and the sound cut off instantly. This went on for what felt like hours. I would hear the laughter in one direction, aim my flashlight, and it would stop. Then it would start again somewhere else, sometimes behind me, sometimes to the side. I never saw a figure. I never heard footsteps. I never heard branches snapping. It was like whoever it was knew how to move quietly or knew how to throw their voice. I started to feel sweat on my neck and on my back, even though the night was cool. My stomach felt tight and my hands shook slightly whenever I tried to hold the flashlight still. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe a group of people found my campsite and decided to mess with me. But I never heard multiple voices, just one laugh. If it was a prank, they were dedicated. They didn't respond to me when I cleared my throat or moved my gear. They never asked for anything. They just laughed, stopped when I looked, and started again when I let my guard down. I began to feel trapped. I was inside my tent, and if I stepped out, I might run into this person or whoever it was. If I stayed inside, I had to listen to that laughter moving around me, closer and then farther, never consistent. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up each time I heard the sound. My breathing turned shallow. I tried to focus on taking slow breaths, but my heart was pounding. My eyes watered a bit and my throat felt scratchy. At some point, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I got out of my sleeping bag, grabbed my backpack, and put on my boots. I kept my flashlight in hand and my pocket knife in the other. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the clearing. The cool air hit my face and I looked around, trying to see movement or a shape that didn't belong. I saw nothing unusual, just the dark outlines of trees and some undergrowth. The laughter had stopped again. I stood there, holding the flashlight but not turning it on. My muscles felt tense and I clenched my teeth without meaning to. I called out in a low voice, "Who's there?" I tried to sound steady and firm, but my voice sounded too rough. There was no reply, just the sound of leaves in the breeze. After a minute, I turned on the flashlight and swept it around the clearing. I saw my tent, my gear next to it, and the trees around me. I walked a few steps toward the direction I had last heard the laughter. The ground felt uneven, covered in leaves and small roots. I stepped carefully, trying not to make too much noise. My flashlight beam shook a little because my hand wouldn't stay steady. I paused and listened. Nothing. Then I moved the beam a bit further to the left. Still nothing. I lowered the flashlight and stood there, holding my breath. Then I heard a quiet snicker behind me. It was so close that I spun around, pointing the flashlight toward the sound. The laughter stopped. I moved the beam around quickly, shining it up and down tree trunks, onto the ground, into the bushes. I saw no one, no movement, just leaves and dark bark. My heart was pounding in my ears now. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I wanted to get away from this place, but it was the middle of the night, and I wasn't sure where to go. The trail back was about an hour's walk, maybe more, and I didn't like the idea of stumbling around in the dark while someone followed me and laughed like that. I decided to wait until first light. I thought if I could just get through the night, I would pack up as soon as I could see and then get out. I went back to my tent, crawled inside, and zipped it up. I sat upright, holding the flashlight in my lap and the knife next to me. I listened to every sound. For a while, I heard nothing. Just the insects and the wind. My breathing slowed down a bit and I tried to relax my shoulders. Suddenly, the laughter started again. This time it sounded like it was right at the edge of the clearing. It was a quick burst of sound, then silence. I gripped the flashlight. I didn't shine it this time. I just listened. Another laugh came, this one shorter and quieter, like the person was holding back. The sound made my chest feel tight. I swallowed and forced myself to breathe slowly. I wanted to say something, to ask what they wanted, but I was afraid to speak again. I just stayed silent. The laughter stopped, and then I heard a slight rustling sound. I kept listening, leaning forward. It sounded like someone moving through the bushes. It wasn't loud, but it was there. I shone the flashlight toward the sound, trying to catch them. As soon as I did, it stopped. No laughter, no rustling. Nothing. I turned the flashlight off again. I thought maybe if I pretended to ignore them, they would go away. I sat there in the dark tent for a long time, just waiting. Occasionally, I would hear a short burst of laughter, never in the same spot twice. Sometimes it sounded closer, sometimes farther. Each time I heard it, I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. I tried to think of a plan. I considered packing my things right then and hiking out with the flashlight. But that meant walking through the trees with limited light while someone followed me around. I decided it wasn't worth it. I stayed in the tent, gripping the flashlight and the knife, and waiting for the sky to brighten. The laughter continued off and on. Sometimes I went several minutes without hearing it. Each time it returned, my heart would jump. I couldn't calm down. My mouth felt dry, and I had to keep swallowing. I took small sips of water, but I didn't want to drink too much and have to step out of the tent. After what felt like hours, I noticed a slight change in the darkness outside. The night was slowly weakening. The sky began to lighten just a bit. I unzipped the tent again and looked out. The shapes of the trees were clearer now. I could see a few rocks on the ground. The laughter had stopped for a while. I waited, scanning the area, expecting to hear it again. I stepped out and looked around carefully. I still saw no sign of anyone else. No footprints in the damp soil near the tent, no broken branches, nothing. As the light improved, I decided to pack up quickly. I gathered my things with shaky hands. I rolled my sleeping bag, folded the tent, and checked the ground for anything I might leave behind. I kept looking over my shoulder and listening. Everything was quiet except for the normal sounds of the forest waking up. Birds started calling from somewhere above. The wind felt cooler on my face now. I put on my backpack and gripped my flashlight. I kept the knife in an easy-to-reach pocket. Then I started walking back toward the trail. I moved carefully but steadily. I looked behind me every few steps, expecting to see someone following. I saw no one. As I got deeper into the forest, the laughter never returned. I heard only my own footsteps, my breathing, and the rustle of leaves under my boots. It took me a while, but eventually I reached the main trail and followed it out. I didn't relax until I was well into the morning, with the sun visible through the trees. I never figured out who was laughing that night. I never saw a face, never heard a word. I just knew that whoever it was didn't want to show themselves. They were there, though, moving around, getting closer, and then backing off. I made it out of that forest without seeing anyone else. I got back to my car, threw my gear in the trunk, and drove away. My hands were still a bit shaky as I gripped the steering wheel. I felt relieved to be away from those trees. I still don't know what that was about. I just know I won't forget that laughter cutting through the dark, stopping every time I tried to catch it with my light. And I know I won't be camping alone in that area again. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something moving in the living room. I had gone to sleep a few hours before, and I was sure I was alone. I lived alone. I had no roommates, no guests, no pets. The noise was soft, like something brushing against the coffee table. I held my breath, stayed still in bed, and waited. I listened for a while, but I heard nothing else. After a few minutes, I got up and walked quietly across the bedroom floor. I opened my door just a crack and looked into the dark hallway. The apartment was silent again. I flipped on the hallway light and checked the living room. Everything seemed normal. I looked around to be sure. The furniture was in place, the windows were closed, and the locks were engaged. I decided to forget it and go back to sleep. The next morning, I felt stupid for feeling paranoid. I had been tired. Maybe I'd heard something outside. I wanted to ignore it, but as I got ready for work, I started noticing small details. My keys were not where I usually left them. I always put them in a small bowl near the TV. That morning, I found them on the kitchen counter next to the microwave. I tried to remember if I had placed them there the night before. I couldn't recall doing that. Still, I had been tired, so maybe I messed up. At work, I kept thinking about that. It bothered me because I had a very clear habit of where I put my keys. I had lived alone for a few years, and I followed a simple routine. Keys in the bowl, phone charger in the bedroom, wallet in the top drawer of my desk. I never changed these habits. They helped me avoid losing things. But maybe I was just stressed. When I got home that evening, I checked the door carefully. The lock looked fine. Nothing seemed forced. I took a quick look inside every room. I looked in the bathroom, under the bed, inside the closet, even in the small storage area in the hallway. Nothing. Nobody was there. I left my phone charger on my nightstand and made dinner. I watched some TV and tried to relax. Before going to sleep, I brushed my teeth and went back to the bedroom. My phone charger was gone. I had left it plugged into the outlet next to my bed. I found it a few minutes later in the bathroom on top of the sink. That made my chest feel tight. I stood there looking at the charger in my hand, trying to process what that meant. If someone had entered my apartment, wouldn't I have heard something? There were no signs of forced entry. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I never had a history of that, but I couldn't explain it otherwise. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up and checking the apartment. Every time I heard a faint sound, I got out of bed and turned on the lights. I saw nothing. The next morning, I felt tired and irritated. This time, my wallet was missing from my desk drawer. I found it inside the pantry, right behind some cereal boxes. My hands shook as I stood there holding my wallet. This wasn't normal. Nothing felt normal anymore. My apartment was small. There weren't many places to hide. If there was someone here, how were they sneaking around? I decided to search every corner. I spent almost an hour moving furniture, looking under cushions, opening every cabinet, checking the laundry room, running my hands along the walls. I found nothing unusual. My apartment was quiet and neat. After I calmed down, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I was misplacing things and forgetting about it. But that didn't feel right. I knew my habits. I knew my home. I tried to stay calm and think logically. If there was an intruder, how were they getting in? I had a deadbolt on the front door. The windows had locks. There was no balcony or fire escape. I was on the 3rd floor. I decided to change the lock on my front door as a precaution. I went out that afternoon, bought a new lock, and installed it before dinner. I felt a bit more confident after that. That night, before sleeping, I made sure everything was in place. Keys in the bowl, charger plugged in, wallet in the drawer. I turned off the lights and got into bed. I tried to stay awake, listening for any sounds, but I eventually drifted off. I woke up early in the morning and checked the apartment immediately. My charger was missing again. I found it inside my shoe near the front door. My stomach felt heavy and my face got warm. My neck felt tense and I started sweating. Someone was messing with me. Someone was in here while I slept. I wondered if they were watching me right now. I decided to get serious about this. I didn't want to call the police yet. I had no proof of a break-in, just weird placements of my belongings. Still, I needed to know what was going on. I bought a small security camera that I could connect to my phone. I placed it in a corner of the living room where it had a clear view of the hallway and the entrance to my bedroom. It wasn't a fancy camera, but it had night vision and motion detection. I tested it, then I turned it off for the day. I didn't want to waste battery. I planned to activate it at night. That night before bed, I turned on the camera and set it to record. I left a few small items in very specific places. I put my keys in the bowl, my charger on the nightstand, my wallet in the drawer. I took photos with my phone to remember their exact positions. I locked the door, checked the windows, and went to bed. I felt nervous, like my heart was pounding too hard. I listened for sounds, but I heard only my own breathing. I fell asleep after a couple of hours. In the morning, I rushed to check the camera's footage. I found that my charger was not in the bedroom. It was in the kitchen sink, next to a wet sponge. My keys were in the same place, but my wallet was now on top of the TV. I looked at the camera feed on my phone. There was nothing. The camera recorded all night. I could see myself going to bed, turning off the lights, and after that, the hallway stayed still. No one appeared. No movement was detected, at least not by the camera's motion sensor. The items were changed, but nobody was captured on camera. This made me angry and scared. I couldn't understand it. I wondered if I had made a mistake setting up the camera. I adjusted it and tried again the next night. This time, I placed more objects around. I left a pen on top of a small table, a spoon near my laptop, a piece of tape on the bathroom door so I could see if it moved. In the morning, every single object had moved. The pen fell to the floor, the spoon ended up under my couch, and the tape was on the bathroom mirror. I checked the footage again. Nothing, just empty rooms, still furniture, no signs of anyone. The objects changed places, but I couldn't see it happen. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I felt stressed all day at work. I was tired and distracted. I kept thinking about the camera footage. There had to be some explanation. Maybe the camera had a glitch. Maybe I needed a better camera. I went back to the store and bought a more expensive model, one with better resolution and continuous recording. I also bought a simple alarm sensor for the front door. It would beep if someone opened it at night. I set it up, tested it, and felt a bit better. I tried again that night. Before sleeping, I turned on the new camera, positioned it in the living room facing the hallway and the bedroom door, and left the old camera in the hallway facing the kitchen. 2 angles. I also made sure the alarm sensor on the front door was active. I locked my door carefully and went to sleep. I felt exhausted, but I forced myself to stay awake as long as possible. After a few hours, I started drifting off, but I kept my ears open for any sound. I woke up suddenly to a small scratching sound. It came from the living room. I looked at my phone. It was about 3:30 a.m. I stayed still in bed and listened. The scratching continued for a few seconds, and then stopped. I tried to get out of bed quietly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might be audible. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. The live feed showed nothing unusual. The living room looked empty. I turned up the volume on my phone, but the scratching had stopped. I checked the door alarm. It was still armed. No beep, no alerts. I waited for a while, then I got out of bed and turned on the bedroom light. I walked slowly into the hallway. I looked around the corner into the living room. Everything was quiet. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. I checked the front door. Still locked. I looked at the cameras. They were both recording, with their lights on. I decided to try to sleep again. Maybe I was imagining things. In the morning, I checked the recordings right away. The new camera caught no intruders. The old camera showed nothing. But once again, objects had moved. My phone charger ended up under the bathroom sink. My TV remote was inside a kitchen drawer. My shoes were lined up near the window. My stomach hurt when I saw this. I felt my jaw clench and my breathing get shallow. I was not imagining anything. Someone or something was doing this while I slept, and I couldn't catch them on camera. It made no sense. I started thinking about how to trap whoever was doing this. I decided to set a physical trap. I placed a tall stack of empty cans near the hallway entrance so if someone walked by, they'd knock it over and wake me up. I put double-sided tape on the floor near my bedroom door, hoping to catch footprints. I placed small pieces of paper in front of every door and drawer, so I'd know if they were opened. That night, I stayed awake in bed listening. I held a flashlight in my hand and kept checking the camera feed on my phone. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft, metallic sound. I jumped up, turned on the bedroom light, and ran into the hallway. The cans were on the floor, but they weren't knocked over. They were arranged in a neat line. The tape on the floor was still clean. No footprints. The door alarm was silent. I looked at every object I had tracked. The papers were moved, but not torn or displaced in a way that made sense. My throat felt dry. My legs trembled. My breathing was rapid, and I felt sweat on my forehead. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone keeps rearranging my stuff, but I have no evidence of a break-in. No forced entry, no figure on camera. I considered calling a friend to spend the night, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I just stood there in my hallway feeling stuck and helpless. I spent the next few days trying different strategies. I slept with all the lights on. I placed cameras in every room. I set my phone to record audio overnight. I tried sleeping on the couch, on the floor, even in the bathroom with the door locked. Every time I woke up, the objects had moved, but I never caught anyone doing it. I started checking for hidden passages or panels in the walls. I found none. I replaced the door lock again. I changed my window locks. Nothing helped. After 2 weeks of this, I was exhausted. I couldn't focus at work. I ate very little. I spent most of my free time searching my apartment. I began considering that maybe I should move out. I looked at my suitcase and thought about packing my things. But moving seemed drastic. I didn't understand what was happening. I just knew I couldn't live like this. One night, I decided to confront it directly. I left all my lights on, sat in the living room with a baseball bat, and forced myself to stay awake until I couldn't keep my eyes open. Around 4 a.m., my eyes started closing. I slapped my face, drank some water, walked around the apartment. I heard a faint sound in the bathroom. I ran there with the bat, flicked the switch, and found nothing. I looked at the sink, the shower, the toilet. Nothing moved. But behind me, I heard something shift in the hallway. I spun around. Nothing was there. I felt goosebumps on my arms. My heart was beating fast. I talked out loud, demanding whoever was there to show themselves. No response. Just silence. In the morning, after another sleepless night, I saw that my shoes had been placed inside the shower. My phone charger was balanced on top of the doorframe. My wallet was stuck behind the couch cushions. I felt lightheaded and sat on the floor. I stayed there for a long time thinking about what to do. I couldn't catch anyone. I couldn't see anyone. My cameras caught no one. But every night the same thing happened. Objects moved around, as if someone was toying with me. My body felt tense all the time. My neck hurt, and my shoulders ached from stress. That day, I took all my valuables and packed them in a bag. I locked the apartment and went to a hotel. I spent the night away from that place. I slept well for the first time in weeks. In the morning, I considered going back. I drove to the apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Everything was quiet. Nothing was moved. I felt strange. I checked every room. Everything looked normal, but I knew if I stayed long enough it would start again. I didn't want to live like that. So I took my bag, locked the door behind me, and left. I never solved the mystery. I just walked away. I woke up feeling heavy and off balance. My neck was stiff and my eyes burned. I had not slept well. I had stayed up too late reading random news articles on my phone and watching short videos that did not hold my attention. I remembered dragging myself to bed sometime after 3 in the morning. The cheap bedside clock had read 3:17 a.m. when I finally turned off the light. Now it was about 7. My head was throbbing with a dull ache. I stood there near my bed, blinking at the weak morning light coming through the window. I wanted to wash my face and see if that helped clear my mind. I walked down the short hallway to my bathroom. The bathroom was small, just enough room for a toilet, a narrow sink, and a shower stall with a plastic curtain. The mirror was above the sink. It was rectangular and had a few small black spots near the edges where the backing had worn off over time. I stood in front of it, leaning on the sink, pressing my palms against the cool porcelain. I took a deep breath, looked down, and then looked up at my reflection. I blinked hard twice. My eyes felt dry. I watched my own face. I expected to see the same tired expression I always had in the morning. For a moment, everything seemed normal. I blinked once more. Then something strange happened. My reflection blinked a few seconds later than I did. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I stood there holding my breath. I tried again. I forced myself to blink one time slowly. I opened my eyes. My reflection stared back at me with wide eyes for a moment, then it blinked. The timing was off by maybe 2 or 3 seconds. It was not in sync with me. I felt my heart rate pick up. I tried again and got the same result. I did not move for a while. I just stood there, breathing through my nose, trying not to panic. I considered that maybe I was just too tired. Maybe my vision was playing tricks on me. I splashed some cold water on my face. The water felt sharp and cold on my skin. I looked up quickly, blinking away the droplets. Again, my reflection delayed its blink. This time I tried something else. I raised my right hand. The reflection raised its right hand too, but a second too late. I put my hand down. A few seconds later, it put its hand down. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I kept doing small tests. I tilted my head to the left. My reflection tilted its head too, but always with that tiny pause before the action. I tried to lean forward and look closely at the glass. The reflection leaned forward late. I turned my head to the side, and it did the same, trailing behind me by a couple of seconds. My mouth went dry. I rubbed my eyes and checked again. Nothing changed. The mirror looked normal. The edges were the same. The frame was dusty as usual. The lighting was normal. But this behavior made no sense. I decided to step back into the hallway. I left the bathroom and returned after a few seconds, hoping that the reflection would reset itself. I walked back in and looked straight at the mirror. My reflection looked tired, just like I felt. But when I blinked, it still did not blink at the same time. It waited a moment before following my action. I felt a cold tension in my stomach. I wiped my face with a towel. I looked around the bathroom. Everything else was normal. The shower curtain was where I left it. The toothbrush stood in its holder. I could hear distant traffic noise through the closed window. My apartment was small and quiet. I listened carefully, but nothing seemed out of place. I walked out again into my bedroom and checked myself in the mirror door of my small closet. There, my reflection matched my movements exactly. No delay. I blinked twice in the closet mirror. Perfectly normal. I raised my hand. Perfect sync. I went back to the bathroom mirror. The delay was still there. I leaned closer and tapped the glass with my fingertip. It felt solid. It looked the same as always. I ran my hand along the edge. I tried cleaning it with a piece of toilet paper, rubbing in a small circle even though it was not dirty. Nothing changed. I stepped back and tried to see if maybe it was some play of light. I turned on the bathroom light and turned it off again. The delay remained. I forced a short laugh, but it sounded shaky in my throat. I shook my head. I muttered to myself, "This is stupid." But I kept staring. I decided to test something else. I lifted both arms above my head. On the mirror, my reflection waited a second or two and then lifted both arms. I dropped my arms, and after a moment, the reflection dropped its arms. I tapped my foot on the tile floor. I could feel the tension in my chest. I tried snapping my fingers. My reflection snapped its fingers later. I tried opening my mouth wide and then closing it. The reflection did the same, late every time. I noticed that the delay was always there, always about the same amount of time. It was not random, it was consistent. I tried to reassure myself that I was just overtired. Maybe my eyes were slow to register what was happening. Maybe my brain was lagging somehow. But I knew that did not make sense. The closet mirror showed no delay. My phone's front camera reflected me instantly. I turned on my phone's camera and aimed it at the bathroom mirror. On the screen of my phone, I saw myself in the mirror. I blinked at the same time as myself. Everything looked normal on the phone screen. But when I looked away from the phone and directly at the mirror, the delay was there. It was not showing up on the phone's image, only to my naked eye. I felt sweat on my forehead. My hands were trembling a bit. I put the phone down on the sink and tried to focus. I was not in pain. I was not hallucinating any strange colors or hearing voices. Everything else seemed normal. I was just seeing this one strange effect in the bathroom mirror. I swallowed hard. I decided to call someone. I picked up my phone and called a friend. He was probably at work, so he did not answer. I considered calling another friend, but I realized I had no idea how to explain this without sounding like I had lost my mind. I hung up and looked back at the mirror. The reflection stood there, calm, just delayed. I tried making small, sudden movements to see if it could ever catch up. I waved my hand quickly in front of my face. The reflection lagged behind. The delay never changed. I wanted to leave the apartment and forget about it, but something kept me there, watching, testing, trying to understand. I checked the wall behind me, the ceiling, the floor. Everything looked normal. The mirror's edges were secure on the wall. It was an old mirror that came with the apartment when I moved in a few years ago. I had never noticed anything odd about it before. I tried speaking out loud. "Hello?" My reflection opened its mouth a couple seconds later, and I saw it shape the word hello silently. I pressed my hand against my chest. My heart was pounding harder now. I could see my own frightened expression appearing on my face, and then 2 seconds later on the reflection. I tried not to panic. I tried to stay focused. I had to find some logical reason for this. But no matter what I tried, the reflection never matched my timing. I stepped back out and walked around my apartment. I checked the kitchen mirror on top of a small cabinet door. Perfect sink. I checked my reflection in the turned-off TV screen in the living room. Perfect sink. I returned to the bathroom and faced that mirror again. The delay was still there, unchanged. I stared at my own eyes in the mirror. I blinked again and watched the late blink. I felt my stomach tighten, and I breathed faster. My shoulders felt tense and stiff. I reached up and rubbed my neck. In the reflection, I saw myself rub my neck a moment later. I tried to ignore the fear and do something drastic. I grabbed the top of the mirror and tried to see if I could lift it off the wall. It was attached firmly. I could not remove it easily. I tried not to damage anything. I let go and backed away. I sat on the toilet seat and looked at the reflection from there. It sat on what would be the toilet in the mirror world, but only after I did. I raised one eyebrow. It raised one eyebrow too, late. I stuck out my tongue. It did the same, late. I whispered some curse words under my breath. The reflection mouthed them silently later. I stood up again and took a deep breath. I felt a dull pressure on my chest. I leaned over the sink, turning the faucet on and then off. I watched the reflection do the same delayed action. I could hear the rush of water. I could smell the slight, moldy scent of the bathroom. I felt the cool ceramic of the sink under my fingers. Everything felt real. There were no strange visual distortions except for this one bizarre delay. I decided I had to leave the apartment. I was too anxious. I hurried to get dressed. I pulled on some jeans and a t-shirt. I put on my sneakers and jacket. Before leaving, I returned one last time to the bathroom and faced the mirror. The reflection faced me. I raised my right hand very slowly, and after a few seconds, it did the same. I blinked once, and it blinked late. I walked out. Outside, the air was cool, and the street was quiet except for a few cars passing. I walked down the block to a nearby cafe. Inside, the smell of coffee and pastries surrounded me. I glanced at the large window at the front of the shop. The window showed my reflection from outside. I lifted my arm and blinked. The window reflection matched me perfectly. I sighed in relief. I felt safer around normal reflections. I ordered a coffee and sat at a small table. I tapped my phone on the table. My knee bounced up and down. I looked around. People were minding their own business. I noticed a small mirror behind the bar near the espresso machine. It was placed at an angle. I could see part of my face in it if I leaned forward. I decided to check that reflection. I got up and pretended to look at the pastries on display while I watched the mirror. I raised my hand slightly. The reflection in the cafe's mirror matched my movement exactly. I returned to my seat and tried to relax. Maybe it was just that one mirror in my apartment. Maybe I was just losing it from lack of sleep. After a few minutes, I finished my coffee and headed back out. I walked around the block. I looked at various reflective surfaces, car windows, shop windows, sunglasses on another person's face. They all reflected me normally. I felt my shoulders relax a bit. I considered that maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it would be gone by the time I got home. After an hour, I returned to my apartment. I walked straight to the bathroom. I felt a knot in my stomach again. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and lifted my hand. The reflection lifted it late. I shut my eyes and opened them. The delay was still there. I clenched my jaw. I felt sweat on my palms. I tried something else. I grabbed my phone and set it to record a video. I aimed it at the mirror and performed a series of gestures, waving, blinking, nodding, shaking my head. When I watched the video on the phone screen afterward, everything looked perfectly normal. There was no delay on the recorded video. I tried looking at the phone screen while making the gestures live. On the phone screen, everything was in sync. When I looked away from the phone and back at the mirror, I saw the delay again. It was like the delay only existed when I looked directly with my own eyes. I felt lightheaded. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. The mirror reflected me sitting there, but only after I had already been sitting for a few seconds. It was so strange to see. I knew that the mirror should have reflected everything instantly, but it was not doing that. I clenched my fists. I stood up again and tried to speak to it. I said, "What do you want?" It silently mouthed the words later, no sound coming from it, of course. I tapped the mirror's surface again. It was solid. I tried pressing my ear to it. Nothing. Just the faint sound of my own breath. I considered covering it with a towel. I took a towel and draped it over the mirror. Now I could not see my reflection. I waited a moment and pulled the towel away. The reflection was still delayed. It was as if nothing would change it. I realized I felt hungry, but I did not want to leave the mirror now. I wanted to figure out what was happening, but there was nothing to figure out. The mirror showed my reflection with a delay. That was it. No other clues, no changes in lighting, no odd noises, no strange smells. I tried opening the bathroom door and seeing if that changed anything. It did not. I tried turning all the lights off and using only the daylight from the window. The delay remained. I felt my legs getting tired from standing. I left the bathroom and sat at my kitchen table. I could see my reflection in the toaster's shiny surface. It matched me normally. I tapped the table, drank a glass of water, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I needed sleep. Maybe if I rested, this would go away, but I could not bring myself to lie down and forget it. I had to check again. I returned to the bathroom for what felt like the 100th time that day. The delay was still there. I tried pinching my arm to see if I was dreaming. I felt the pain and saw my reflection pinch its arm late. I tried ignoring it. I brushed my teeth. I watched my reflection brush its teeth with a delay. I spit into the sink, and a few seconds later, it spit into the imaginary sink in the mirror. I washed my face and the reflection lagged behind. I combed my hair and saw the delayed version do it after me. I could not understand why this was happening, and it frightened me. But I was also exhausted. I stopped testing and just stood still. After a while, I stepped back and left the bathroom. I closed the door. I sat on my bed. My heart was still beating fast. My face felt hot. I wanted to calm down. I stared at the closed bathroom door for a few minutes. The apartment was quiet. My phone buzzed once with a spam notification. I ignored it. I thought about leaving the apartment again, but that did not solve anything. The problem was in the bathroom mirror. Or maybe the problem was with my own eyes. I could not tell anyone about this. They would think I was joking or losing my mind. I got up and slowly opened the bathroom door. The mirror was right there on the wall, looking innocent. I stepped in front of it again. I raised my hand, and it raised its hand late. I blinked, and it blinked late. I took a deep breath. I looked closely at my own eyes in that reflection. They looked the same as always, just delayed. I reached out and touched the mirror one last time. It felt smooth and cold. I turned off the bathroom light, walked out, and shut the door. I went to my living room, sat on the couch, and looked at my own faint reflection in the blank TV screen. It matched me perfectly. I told myself I would not check the bathroom mirror again for the rest of the day. I would try to sleep early tonight and hope that by morning the mirror would be normal. I tried to push away the nervous feeling in my chest and focused on breathing slowly. I hoped that tomorrow, this would all be over. I remember that night in clear detail. It was around dusk when I decided to go through the old attic in my parents' house. They had moved away a few months earlier. The house was empty except for a few pieces of furniture and a lot of boxes stacked against the walls. I had taken a few days off work to handle the cleanup. I wanted to clear the old place before putting it on the market. I had no idea what I would find up there, but I didn't expect an old rotary phone sitting in a dusty corner. I didn't expect it to ring in the middle of the night. I didn't expect to pick it up and hear those voices. I was in my late 30s at that time. I had never cared much about old things. I wasn't nostalgic. I just wanted the attic cleared, the walls cleaned, and everything sold or thrown out. The attic was hot, and the air was stale. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and it gave off a weak yellowish light. I could see dust particles floating around. There were boxes full of old clothes, some old magazines, a few broken appliances that my father must have shoved up there years ago. I sorted through them one by one, checking what could be donated and what should be tossed. After an hour or so, I saw the phone. It was a black rotary phone with a thick handset and a curly cord. It had a simple shape, no branding that I could recognize, just a dial and a receiver. I picked it up. It was heavier than the phones I knew as a kid. The cord ended in a strange connector, not the type we see now. It looked worn out. The phone smelled like old plastic and dust. It was just an object. I tossed it on top of a box and continued sorting through everything else. By the time I finished, it was late evening. I carried down a few boxes to the living room. I planned to drive them to the recycling center the next day. I locked up the house, turned off the lights, and decided to sleep on a spare mattress in my old bedroom. I didn't have a proper bed anymore, but I had brought a sleeping bag and a pillow. I placed the phone down in the living room before heading to bed. I hadn't thought about it much. It was just old junk. I figured maybe someone would buy it as a vintage piece. I didn't care at the time. I turned off the hallway light and went to my bedroom. My bedroom was almost empty. The walls were bare, the closet was empty, and there was just a small lamp next to my mattress. I lay down and tried to relax. The house was silent. Outside, I could hear a faint hum of a distant car or some wind, but inside, everything was quiet. Eventually, I dozed off. I'm not sure what time it was when I heard the first ring. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The sound was distant and muffled. It was that old-fashioned ring, the type I hadn't heard in years. I opened my eyes and listened. It rang again. I recognized it immediately as the old phone. I sat up and rubbed my face. My heart wasn't pounding yet. I was just confused. I got up, walked to the living room, and turned on the overhead light. The phone was on top of a box. It was ringing. The dial was not lit up, of course, and it wasn't connected to anything. I checked the cord. It was not plugged into any outlet. I stared at it. It rang a third time. My mouth felt dry. My scalp tingled. I reached out and lifted the receiver. I didn't say anything. I just listened. There were voices on the line. It sounded like more than one person talking, but I couldn't make out the words. It was muffled, like they were speaking from far away. The tone of the voices was low, not loud. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. The voices continued, but I couldn't understand them. I said hello again. Nothing changed. They kept talking in those low, unclear tones. I listened for about 20 seconds. Then the line went dead. There was a soft click, and the voices stopped. I stood there holding the receiver, my arm tense. After a few seconds, I hung up. I walked around the living room, checking if there was any trick, maybe a hidden speaker or something. I followed the cord, lifted the phone, shook it gently. Nothing made sense. I checked the walls to see if there was some old connection point that I had missed. The wall jacks were there, but no cables were connected. The main phone line in the house was disconnected a long time ago. My parents had relied on cell phones. The old landline service ended years before. I stood there for a few minutes. I tried to remain calm. I was alone in the house, and I didn't like the way my breathing sounded in my ears. I decided I wouldn't think too much about it. I put the phone inside a cardboard box and closed the box. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. Maybe it was some kind of strange interference or even a battery-powered trick. Although I couldn't see any batteries, I went back to my bedroom. It took me a while to fall asleep. I kept expecting to hear another ring, but there was silence. The next morning I woke up early. The sun was coming through the window. I got dressed and went straight to the living room. I opened the box and looked at the phone. It was just lying there. I felt uneasy. I took it out of the box and turned it upside down. I looked for any kind of battery compartment. I saw none. I tried turning the dial. It moved freely. The handset seemed normal. The cord was intact but ended in an old connector. I tapped it. It was just plastic and metal parts. Nothing unusual. I checked the rest of the house. No hidden gadgets, no extra wiring. I had planned to take the boxes to the recycling center that morning, but I decided to deal with the phone first. I drove to a nearby electronics store. I showed the phone to a clerk who looked confused. I asked if an old phone like this could store power somehow. He looked at me like I was asking something strange and said, "Not really." I asked if maybe it could be picking up a radio signal. He shrugged and said he didn't know. I left feeling stupid. I went back to the house and put the phone on the kitchen counter. I left it there while I worked on clearing more junk. All day, it was silent. That night, after a long day of packing, I decided to sleep in the house again. I wanted to finish the job the next morning. I shut off all the lights except for a small lamp in the hallway. I placed the phone in the kitchen. I made sure it was not near any walls or anything else. I left it on the counter, far from any source of electricity. Then I went to my room and got into my sleeping bag. I tried to think about something else. I focused on the fact that I was almost done cleaning. I planned to call a realtor soon. I planned to get rid of everything and leave town. The house didn't feel comfortable anymore. It was too quiet and empty. Sometime around midnight, the phone rang again. I heard that same old-fashioned ring. I jumped up this time. My heart beat faster. I went straight to the kitchen. The phone was ringing. The sound was clear and steady. I lifted the receiver. I listened. The voices were there again. They were calm, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like people talking in another room. I said, "Who is this?" There was no response. I said, "I can't hear you clearly." The voices continued in the same low tone. They didn't respond to my words. I waited. After about 30 seconds, the line went dead again. I hung up. I paced around the kitchen. I felt tense. My chest was tight. I checked every corner of the kitchen, then the living room, then the hallway. I found nothing. I had the phone in my hand. I shook it, tapped it, put my ear to the earpiece without pressing any buttons. Nothing. It was just a piece of old plastic. I decided I wouldn't let it get to me. I carried the phone to the attic. I walked up the creaky stairs. The attic smelled like dust and cardboard. I placed the phone in a box full of old magazines, then I covered it with another box. I sealed the top box with packing tape. I made sure to bury it in a pile of other boxes so I wouldn't hear it even if it rang. I went back down, turned on the TV in the living room for some noise, and sat on a chair. I didn't have cable, but I had a small antenna, and it picked up some local station with old reruns. I watched TV until I felt calmer. After a few hours, nothing happened. I turned off the TV and tried to sleep again. I managed to get a few hours of rest. The next morning, I felt tired. My neck was stiff and my head ached. I climbed into the attic to check on the phone. I unstacked the boxes. I peeled off the tape. I lifted the top box. The phone was there, right where I had placed it. It hadn't moved. I grabbed it and took it downstairs. I decided to smash it. I went out to the driveway. I placed the phone on the concrete. I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox in the garage. I hesitated for a second. It was just an old phone, right? I lifted the hammer and struck the phone's body. The plastic cracked. I hit it again. The dial broke off. I hit it a few more times until it was in pieces. I picked up the fragments and threw them in a trash bag. I felt a sense of relief. Now it couldn't ring again. It was gone. I put the trash bag in a large bin outside, closed the lid, and went back inside. I spent the rest of the day loading up my car with junk. I took a few trips to the recycling center. I didn't think about the phone anymore. I cleaned out some cabinets and swept the floors. I opened all the windows to let fresh air in. The house felt neutral again. By evening, I had done most of the work I needed to do. I was going to leave the next day. I had a small dinner in the kitchen, just some canned soup I heated on a portable stove. There was no furniture except a folding chair and a little side table I'd brought from home. I thought about sleeping one more night there to finish a few small tasks in the morning. I decided it was safe now. No phone, no noise. Around midnight, I heard something in the attic. It was a soft scraping sound, like a box being nudged. I froze. I listened carefully. The sound stopped. I took a flashlight and climbed the attic stairs. The attic was dark. The single bulb barely lit the area. I scanned the floor. The boxes were stacked as I'd left them. I walked around them. Nothing looked different. I thought maybe it was just the house settling. I stepped carefully between boxes. I saw nothing unusual. Then I heard a click. I turned around, pointing the flashlight. I saw a piece of the phone's cord on the floor. It was a small piece of wire and plastic from when I smashed it. I must have missed that piece when I cleaned up. It was just lying on the floor. I picked it up. It felt rough on one end. I placed it in my pocket. I wanted no traces left of that phone. I went back downstairs. I locked the attic door. I sat in the living room. I listened. The house was quiet. I got my sleeping bag and tried to sleep right there on the floor. I didn't want to sleep in the bedroom anymore. I was tired and my shoulders were tense. I thought about going to a hotel, but it was late and I figured I could handle a few more hours. The house was dark except for a small lamp. The silence was complete. I wondered if I should turn on the TV for some noise. I decided not to, because I wanted to hear if anything happened again. I lay there with my eyes open for a long time. I kept thinking about the phone ringing. I remembered the sound of those voices. They didn't speak to me. They just talked quietly among themselves. I never understood any words, just the low tone of conversation. I felt a knot in my stomach when I thought about it. My breathing got shallow. My palms were sweaty. But then I reminded myself that I had destroyed the phone. There was no phone anymore. It couldn't ring again. There was nothing for me to fear. It was just an old piece of junk. Maybe it was malfunctioning, picking up some odd signal. Now it was gone. I stayed awake for a few more hours. I heard no sounds. I felt a bit calmer. Eventually I slept. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was coming through the windows. Everything looked normal. I got up, stretched my back, and checked the attic one more time. Nothing had changed. I took out the last bags of trash. I looked inside the trash bin outside. The pieces of the phone were still there. They were broken and silent. I closed the bin. I drove away that afternoon. I didn't stay any longer. I left the house empty and clean. I called a realtor on my way out of town. I never told anyone about the phone. There was nothing to tell that made sense. I moved on with my life. Sometimes I remember the sound of that ring in the dark. Sometimes I remember holding that old receiver and hearing voices that never answered me. I think about it only as a strange event I can't explain. I'm just glad I never heard it again. I moved into my new apartment on a Tuesday morning. I remember the way my arm hurt from carrying boxes up the narrow hallway. The lights in the corridor were dim and made everything look a bit grimy. The door to my apartment was a plain brown slab with a scratched brass number, 306. I pushed it open, stepped inside, and found a small living room with old wooden floors and a window facing a quiet street. The kitchen was in a corner, separated by a short counter. The bedroom was just big enough for a bed and a dresser. There was a faint smell of paint. The building seemed normal enough. Neighbors walked by without saying much. I had no reason to feel anything strange that first day. On Wednesday afternoon, I checked the mailbox downstairs. Inside, I found 2 advertisements and a postcard. I remember noticing the postcard's edges were yellowed. The photograph on the front showed a park bench and a small fountain. I turned it over. There was no return address and no name. The handwriting was careful and small. It said, "Your sink will clog today." I stood there in the building's lobby for a second, feeling confused. It was a weird message. I shrugged and tucked it into my back pocket. At that time, I thought it was probably some stupid prank. I had a lot on my mind. I needed to unpack my stuff, go buy groceries, and figure out where to place my furniture. That evening, around 7, I started washing some dishes. I had made a sandwich and used a single plate and a knife. As I rinsed the plate, the water in the sink suddenly stopped draining. I flicked the switch on the garbage disposal. It made a weak sound and died. I looked down and saw a small backup of dirty water. It smelled like rotten food. I tried to poke at it with a fork, but nothing moved. After a few minutes, I realized it was clogged. I remembered the postcard. My forehead felt warm, and I noticed my shoulders were tense. I could feel a slight tremor in my hands. The message on that card had predicted this. It was too exact to be a coincidence. The next day, I found another postcard. This time, it was in my mailbox again. It showed a picture of a sunny beach scene, but it looked old, like something from decades ago. On the back, the handwriting was the same. It read, "You will drop your mug and crack it." I stood there reading it a few times. I wondered who was doing this. I didn't know many people in the city yet. I had moved for work and hadn't even given out my address to anyone but the office and the utility companies. I carried the postcard upstairs, threw it on the kitchen counter, and tried to go about my day. I felt nervous, though. I decided not to use my mug. I stored it away in a cabinet and pulled out a cheap plastic cup for my coffee. I thought I was smarter than whoever sent the card. That afternoon, I opened my fridge and took out a carton of milk. My phone buzzed on the counter. I turned to grab it, and my elbow hit the cup of coffee I had just poured. It fell to the floor, bounced, and splashed hot liquid all over the cabinets. The plastic cup didn't crack, but when I bent down to wipe the mess, my knee hit a glass mixing bowl on the lower shelf. The bowl dropped to the floor and cracked. It wasn't the mug, but something still broke. That felt close enough. The tension in my stomach sharpened. I felt cornered. The postcards were predicting small events. And even when I tried to avoid them, something close to the prediction happened. On Friday, another postcard arrived. This one showed a cobblestone street and an old car. On the back, the message said, "You will have trouble with the elevator today." I looked at the building's old elevator doors. I usually use the stairs, but I decided to test something. I would avoid the elevator entirely. I climbed the stairs up and down twice that day just to prove a point. Around 6 in the evening, I carried out my trash. As I descended, I heard a strange grinding sound echoing through the stairwell. When I reached the lobby, I saw 2 people standing by the elevator doors. The elevator was stuck between floors, and they were calling for help. I hadn't set foot inside it, but the building's elevator was definitely giving people trouble. That felt like another success for the postcards. I stood there, watching the old doors, feeling my heart beat faster. I kept silent and went back to my apartment. By Saturday, I had 3 of these postcards on my counter. Their predictions were small and not dangerous, but their accuracy was unsettling. Someone had to be watching me. I checked my front door's lock and looked through the peephole. I listened to the walls. Everything seemed normal, just muffled TV noise from the apartment next door. I didn't recognize anyone around here. The postcards had no stamp, no postmark. They were being placed directly in my mailbox. I wondered if it could be a building staff member, maybe the superintendent. I decided to ask the building manager. I went downstairs and found him in the small office near the lobby. He was a middle-aged man with a shaved head. His name was Kevin. I asked him if he had seen anyone messing with mailboxes. He said he hadn't. He seemed annoyed that I was bothering him with something he considered small. I showed him one of the postcards. He looked at it, shrugged, and said he had no idea. He told me that if it continued, I could call the police. I thanked him and left. Calling the police over old postcards predicting small annoyances sounded ridiculous. I had no evidence of a real crime. I returned to my apartment and spent the rest of the day checking the hallway through my peephole every time I heard a noise. I never saw anyone approach my door. On Sunday morning, I found another postcard. This one said, "Your shower water will run cold." I turned on the shower and waited. The water started warm and then turned ice cold within seconds. I stepped back, shivering. I turned the knob again, but it stayed cold. My heart was pounding. I felt frustrated and a bit scared. I stood there, naked and wet, staring at the tiles. Whoever was doing this knew details about my daily life. They knew I would try to take a shower at that time. They knew my sink would clog, that I would break something, that the elevator would fail, that my shower would turn cold. These were small events, not harmful, but the precision was unsettling. I needed to see how these postcards were getting delivered. On Monday, I woke up early and went down to the lobby before the mail typically arrived. I stood behind the stairwell door and waited. I waited for over an hour. It was quiet. I only heard footsteps of a neighbor leaving for work, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner somewhere, and a car passing outside. I checked the mailboxes after that hour. Nothing new inside mine. I went to work feeling nervous, but also curious. At work, I tried to focus on my tasks, data entry, responding to emails, the usual dull stuff. My mind kept drifting to the postcards. I tried to imagine possible suspects. Maybe my boss trying to unsettle me for no reason. Maybe someone in the building who got a key to the mail area. Maybe a delivery person pulling some prank. When I got home that evening, I checked my mailbox again. A new postcard was there. It said, "Your bathroom light will flicker." I stood in the lobby, reading it under the dull light. I went upstairs, stepped into my bathroom, and turned on the light switch. The bulb flickered, then stabilized. A few minutes later, while I was brushing my teeth, it flickered again, making a faint buzzing noise. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. My hands gripped the sink. The predictions kept coming true, and I had no clue why. On Tuesday, I tried ignoring it. Another postcard arrived. It said, "A neighbor will knock on your door asking for a favor." I sat in my living room and waited. I tried to watch TV. After an hour, there was a knock. I got up, feeling the muscles in my legs tense. I looked through the peephole and saw a guy I had only seen once in the hallway. I opened the door. He asked if I had a spare light bulb because his had burned out. I said I didn't and quickly closed the door. Then I leaned against it, breathing faster than normal. Whoever was sending these cards knew something about my neighbor's habits as well. I tried leaving the postcards in the hallway, hoping maybe I would find them gone when I returned. On Wednesday, I placed the postcard I got in the morning on a small table by the elevator and then went out to buy groceries. When I came back, it was gone. But in my mailbox, I found a new one. It said, "Your left shoe will tear." I checked my shoes. They were all fine. Later that day, while rushing upstairs carrying a grocery bag, I stubbed my toe on a metal edge near the stair landing. My left sneaker tore along the side. I had to throw it away. I held the torn shoe in my hand, feeling the uneven rip, and realized how trapped I felt. I started to wonder if it would ever escalate. The postcards never mentioned anything too dangerous. They were always small, annoying things, but that didn't make it any easier. I tried talking to a neighbor I had seen a few times, a man named Eric who lived on the floor above mine. I asked if he had received any strange mail. He said no. I tried to hint that someone was leaving weird postcards. He just shrugged and said I should ignore it. I walked away feeling like I was losing my mind. On Thursday, the postcard said, "You will trip on the lobby rug." I decided to avoid the lobby rug completely. I would step around it carefully. I walked downstairs, kept my eyes fixed on it, and stepped around it. As I was passing, the door behind me swung open as a resident walked out, hitting my shoulder and causing me to lose balance. I stumbled forward, catching my foot on the edge of the rug. I fell onto my hands and knees. The rug felt rough under my palms. The resident apologized, helped me up, and I nodded quietly. I returned to my apartment with dirty palms and a dull ache in my right knee. I washed up, cursing under my breath. The postcards always won. On Friday night, I stayed awake until 2 in the morning, crouched near my apartment door, listening. I heard distant voices, a toilet flushing next door, some footsteps above me. Nothing suspicious. I checked the hallway several times. I saw nobody placing any postcards. The mailboxes were locked behind a glass panel in the lobby, but I could see mine from a distance. Still, at 8 in the morning, another postcard was inside. It read, "Your kitchen faucet will drip." When I checked, a thin, steady drip was coming from the faucet's spout, hitting the sink with a light tapping sound. I turned the knob tight, but the drip continued. I placed a towel under it, feeling frustrated and tired. My stomach felt tight each time I looked at these postcards. They were old, their corners bent, images faded. I inspected them closely. No writing on the front except the printed name of some old place or old photographer. The handwriting was always the same. It used a thin black pen, neat and even. I tried to match it with any note I had from anyone, but I had nothing similar. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was predicting minor inconveniences in my life. They would think I was wasting their time. On Saturday, I hid in the lobby behind a large potted plant after the mailman came and went. I watched him open the mailbox panel, insert the regular mail, and close it. I waited another 30 minutes after he left. No one else approached the mailboxes. When I finally checked my mailbox, I found another postcard. This time it said, "You will hear scratching at your door this evening." I felt a chill run down my spine. I returned upstairs and locked my door. That evening, I sat on the floor with the lights off. I held a flashlight and stayed silent. Around 9, I heard a faint scratching noise at my door. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I crawled closer and looked through the peephole. I saw nothing, just the empty hallway. The scratching continued for a few seconds and then stopped. I felt sweat on my back. I stayed there for a long time, listening to my heartbeat. Whoever this was, they were right outside my apartment. After that, I tried throwing the postcards away. I tore them up and tossed them. The next day, I found 2 new postcards. One said, "Your window will stick and not open." The other said, "Your hallway light will dim." I checked the window. It was stuck. The hallway light outside my apartment looked dimmer than before, like the bulb was about to burn out. My chest felt tight. I swallowed hard. The postcards would not stop. The predictions kept happening. They never threatened me with serious harm. It was always these annoying, nerve-wracking inconveniences. I finally decided to talk to the superintendent again. He repeated he had no idea and suggested I change the lock on my mailbox. I went to a locksmith that afternoon and got a new lock. I installed it carefully, testing it a few times. The next day, there was another postcard. It must have been slipped under my door, because my mailbox lock was still intact. The card said, "Your door hinge will squeak." I opened and closed the door. The hinge made a high-pitched squeak I had never heard before. I felt trapped. The postcards found a way in, no matter what I did. I searched my apartment carefully. I checked behind the fridge, inside cabinets, under furniture. I tried to see if there were hidden cameras or something like that. I found nothing. Everything was normal. Outside, life went on. People came and went. The building smelled like cheap disinfectant. I had no sign of anyone targeting me for a clear reason. Maybe they just liked messing with me. In the following days, I tried to live as if the postcards didn't matter. But every morning, I found a new one. The predictions kept coming true. I started to plan around them. If the postcard said I would spill coffee, I drank tea. If it said the door downstairs would be stuck, I left early. But no matter what I tried, something close to the prediction happened. The postcards were always right. I felt tired, my body tense, and my head ached. I jumped whenever I heard a noise outside my door. Now, I keep them all in a drawer. I stopped tearing them up. I check each one, read it, and see what happens. I don't know who sends them or why. I don't know how they know these things. I tried ignoring them, and it never worked. I tried avoiding what they said and ended up getting caught in some twist of fate. At this point, I just accept that someone is playing a game with me, and I can't figure out the rules. Every day, I open the mailbox or check under my door. I find a postcard. I read it. I wait for the small, annoying event to happen. I deal with it. Then I go to sleep, feeling tense, knowing tomorrow there will be another card, and I have no idea how to stop it. I remember that night started with me feeling restless. I had finished eating a late dinner and stepped outside to get some fresh air. I was leaning against the side of my car, trying to relax. The street was quiet, and there were no cars passing by. The sky was dark, and I could see a few stars, but not many. I could hear my neighbor's dog barking in the distance. I could smell the grass which had been cut earlier that day. The pavement under my feet felt cool. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I was just trying to clear my head before going back inside. As I stood there, I noticed something odd about the old house across the street. It was 2 stories tall, with chipped paint on the exterior walls and a large porch that looked like no one had set foot on it for years. I remembered that people said it had been empty for a long time. Sometimes I would walk past it during the day, and I never saw anyone there. No cars in the driveway. No curtains changing positions, no signs of daily life. It was just a structure sitting there, decaying slowly. That night I saw a light turn on in one of the upstairs rooms. The light was not bright, but it was clear. 1 second the room was dark, and then I saw a faint glow through the dusty window. I froze and stared. I thought I might be seeing a reflection from the streetlight, but the angle was wrong. My eyes followed the shape of the window, and the light was definitely coming from inside the house. I wondered if maybe someone had finally moved in, but I had heard nothing about that. The houses on this street were old, and whenever someone moved in or out, people talked, but I had heard no news. I kept looking, and a few seconds later that light went off. The room was dark again. I stood there a bit longer, feeling my pulse quicken. Then another window on the left side of the second floor lit up. It stayed lit for about 20 seconds. It went off as well. Then the window on the right side of the first floor lit up. This pattern continued for a while, lights going on and off in different rooms, sometimes staying on for a few seconds, sometimes longer, always with no clear pattern. I felt uneasy. My mouth got dry, and I could hear myself breathing faster. I tried to calm down and think logically. Maybe someone was testing the wiring. Maybe there was an electrician working late, but I saw no vehicle out front, and no ladder, and no sign of anyone moving around. It was just those lights, going on and off, sometimes flickering, sometimes steady. I stepped closer to the edge of my property to see if I could spot any movement inside. The street lamp's weak light didn't help much. I saw no silhouettes, no shadows. I didn't want to go inside my house yet. I felt curious and uneasy. I decided to walk over to my neighbor's place. He lived 2 houses down on the same side of the street as me. He was a quiet man in his early 50s, always polite. I walked up his driveway and knocked on his front door, feeling a slight tension in my shoulders. After a moment, he opened the door, holding a beer, looking confused. "Sorry to bother you. You see those lights?" I said. I pointed toward the old house across the street from mine. My neighbor stepped out onto his porch and looked. By then, the lights were off again, as if nothing had happened. I felt a little embarrassed. Maybe I looked nervous, and he could tell. He said he didn't see anything now. I tried to explain what I had seen, the lights going on and off inside a house that was supposed to be empty. He scratched his chin and said that house had been empty for years. He said the last tenant left in a hurry, complaining about strange things. He said no one ever confirmed what happened, but the guy who left swore he saw someone inside at night moving from room to room, even though he lived alone. The neighbor shrugged and said he never paid much attention. He suggested maybe some squatters got in, or some pranksters playing around with flashlights. I listened, then thanked him and walked back to my house. Before going inside, I looked at the old house again. Everything was dark now. I stood there for maybe a full minute waiting, but nothing happened. Eventually, I went inside and locked my door. I sat in my living room with the TV on low volume, thinking about what I had seen. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I say? Lights flickering in an empty house, no real threat. They would probably send a patrol car by, see nothing, and move on. I decided to wait. That night I couldn't sleep well. I kept getting out of bed to peek through my upstairs window, which had a direct view of that old house. Each time, I saw nothing but darkness. After a few hours of restless turning in bed, I finally drifted off, but my sleep was shallow. I woke up tired and irritable the next morning. The next day was uneventful. I had some work to do in my home office, and I tried to focus on that. I drove out for groceries in the afternoon. When I passed in front of the old house, I glanced at it quickly. No changes. Same worn-out porch, same boarded-up basement windows, same peeling paint. The front door looked locked. I saw no footprints on the dusty steps, no signs of movement, just an abandoned building, silent and still. As night came again, I decided to keep a closer watch. I ate an early dinner and then turned off most of the lights in my house, so I could observe from my upstairs window without glare. I pulled up a chair and positioned it near the window, keeping the curtain slightly parted. Outside, the streetlights cast a pale orange glow. I saw my neighbor's porch light. I saw the shape of trees behind the old house. Everything was quiet. I waited about an hour. Then, around 10 at night, I saw a faint light in the second-floor window of the old house. It was very dim, but it was there. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the window glass. The light stayed on for about 15 seconds, then went off. Then I saw another light on the opposite side of the second floor. That one flickered a bit, then steadied, then went off. My heart rate increased. I felt a tightness in my chest and my fingertips felt cold. I didn't understand what I was seeing. It made no sense that these lights would behave like this. I put on my shoes and stepped outside. I stood on my front lawn, looking directly at the old house. I tried to figure out if maybe it was someone inside with a flashlight walking around, but the pattern didn't match someone walking. The lights would appear in one window, then go off, then reappear in a completely different window on a different floor too quickly. It was too fast for a person to move. I didn't see any figures and I didn't hear anything. The air was still, and I could smell the faint odor of someone's barbecue from a few houses away. I rubbed my arms. It wasn't that cold, but I felt a chill. I wanted to be sure. I decided to approach the old house. I walked across the street, staying quiet. As I got closer, I noticed the front yard was full of weeds, and the path to the porch was cracked. The porch steps creaked under my weight. I leaned forward and tried to look through the front window. It was covered in dust and grime on the inside, so I could barely see anything. I tried knocking softly on the front door, even though I expected no answer. Nothing, just silence. I moved along the side of the house, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. The side windows were just as dirty. The backyard was overgrown with tall grass. I stepped on something metallic, maybe an old garden tool. It made a dull clank sound. I held my breath for a moment, listening. No response, no movement. I looked up at the windows above me. They were dark. I felt my legs tense up. I was nervous, but I also didn't want to leave without understanding what was going on. I decided to try the back door. I walked around and saw that the back porch was in even worse shape than the front. One of the steps was half rotten. I tested it with my foot before stepping on it fully. It held my weight, but barely. The back door looked locked. I tried the handle gently. Locked, as expected. I didn't feel like breaking in or forcing the door. That would be too much. Instead, I looked for any signs that someone had broken in. No fresh scratches, no pry marks, no broken glass. As I stood there, I glanced up again at the upper windows. For a moment, I saw a faint glow inside. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. My breathing became shallow. I didn't hear any footsteps. I didn't hear doors opening or closing. Just that glow, appearing and disappearing. I stepped off the porch and walked back to the front yard, feeling uneasy. I looked across the street and could still see my own house and the other houses. Nothing out of place there. Just this one house acting strange. I eventually went back to my place. I locked the door and sat in the living room, thinking. I thought about calling the neighbor again. But what would he do? He had already told me what he knew. The house was empty. The last tenant left quickly, claiming to see things. Now I was seeing things too. But these weren't hallucinations. They were actual lights, real physical light inside that house. I considered calling the police this time, but again, what would I report? I didn't want trouble or to be seen as the weird guy on the street. I decided to wait one more night and see if the pattern continued. If it did, I would call the cops and have them take a look. If there was someone inside messing around, they would find out. If there was some kind of electrical malfunction, maybe they could identify it. The next day passed slowly. I worked from home again. I tried to keep busy. I didn't mention anything to anyone else. I saw my neighbor mowing his lawn in the afternoon. I thought about going over to ask him more about the old tenant, but I decided against it. I didn't want to seem too obsessed. I had no concrete explanation, and that made me feel frustrated. That evening, after dinner, I sat by my window again. I turned off all the lights in my living room. I opened the curtains just enough so I could see the old house. At first, everything was normal. It got darker and the streetlights came on. I waited for hours. My back started hurting from sitting too long. I got up and paced around my living room, then came back to the window. Around midnight, the light started again. This time, the sequence was quicker. I saw the upstairs window light up, then the downstairs window, then one on the side. It kept going, off and on, without any pattern I could understand. I felt my scalp tighten, and I gripped the windowsill. I looked for any sign of a person inside, but saw nothing but those lights. I grabbed my phone and decided to call the police. I reported that I suspected someone was trespassing inside the old house. I said I saw lights turning on and off. The dispatcher said they would send a patrol car to check. I waited. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating faster than normal. I opened the front door to stand on my porch and watch. About 10 minutes later, a patrol car rolled down the street and stopped in front of the old house. I saw 2 officers get out. They shone their flashlights at the windows and tried the front door. I stayed on my porch watching quietly. They circled the house, checking the windows and doors. They didn't break in. They just looked around with their flashlights. After a few minutes, one of them crossed the street toward my house. I stepped off the porch to meet him. He asked if I was the one who called. I said yes and explained what I had seen. He seemed unimpressed. He said the house looked secure, no signs of forced entry, no lights on inside now. He suggested maybe I was seeing reflections or maybe an electrical short causing a faint glow. I tried to insist that I saw clear lights turning on and off. He shrugged. He said without evidence of trespassing, they couldn't do much. They left. I stood there, frustrated and confused. After the patrol car disappeared around the corner, I turned back to look at the house. Darkness. Nothing. Just a quiet old building. I felt tired. My neck was stiff and my forehead was sweaty. I had no explanation for what was happening. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with the TV off. I could hear my own breathing, slow and shallow. I decided I had done enough. I had tried to understand, but I got nowhere. I would leave it alone. If the lights continued, maybe someone else would notice. Maybe eventually something would turn up. But I was done watching. I was done losing sleep. If that house wanted to stay empty and flicker its lights at night, that was its own problem. In the days that followed, I avoided looking at the house. I parked my car in a spot where I wouldn't have to face it. I focused on my routines. I kept my curtains closed at night, and if I needed air, I stood in my backyard instead of the front. I stopped talking about it with the neighbor. I never did figure out who or what caused those lights. The house remained empty, still on the market, still unclaimed. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself thinking about it. My body would tense up slightly, and I would remember those silent windows lighting up for no reason. But I never went back to investigate. I never called the police again. I just tried to forget. Over time, the memory faded a bit, but it never left me completely. It stayed with me, a strange detail in my otherwise ordinary life.